Good morning, Board of Directors for the HART Board meeting, June 21st, Thursday, 2018, and it's roughly about 8:08 a.m. this morning. I would like to call for public testimony, but prior to that, let me just remind everybody that it's a 3-minute time limit that we're going to hold. Our board has, oh, sorry, 2 minutes. I almost gave you an extra minute then. 2-minute testimony. When the alarm goes off, please wrap up, conclude whatever you have to say. And we're going to make sure that it also sticks on the agenda items only and on the topics. So the first person I'd like to call, Barbara.
Oops, this one's high. Pretty high. Thank you. Good morning. Barbara Armentrout. I'm a commissioner on the Rate Commission, but I'm speaking as an individual. And I want to reserve, after presentations, possibly commenting. But I wanted to thank the board for having on the last meeting about the smart card, because it had to be deferred from the meeting before. I want to thank you for having that presentation, because that was needed. We kind of need to know what's going on, so when we come time to do the fares for the rail, we know what to do. So thank you for putting that on last meeting.
Oh, thank you, Barbara.
Okay.
Brian Norris.
Good morning, Board. Thank you very much for taking your time. Brian Norris with Stantec. I'm the construction manager that manages the Eastside CE&I contract for HART. I'm also a vice president with Stantec. I really wanted to come this morning just to say thank you very much for the opportunity we've had over the years to work with you, work with HART on the East section, and also just as a company and as a person, extend our support for some of the discussions that have been going on for the P3 delivery method. This is something that we've done in Canada and across the world for decades. And we've seen great benefits to the community. And I come here to tell you that, depending upon how it's structured and depending upon how things would go, potentially there would be reduction in our scope of work and our fee. And we're good with that. We're okay with that. We're committed to this program. We're committed to the community. And I thought it was important for me just to share that with the board and to share that we are supportive of whatever delivery method you choose. We're there to support you, but just to again, convey our thanks for what we've done with you, and more importantly, just to say we've seen that successful. We're committed to making sure that this stays on track for the East section. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Randy Roth.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm a professor emeritus from the University of Hawaii, but I'm here on my own behalf, not speaking on behalf of any organization. It would be difficult, I think, for anyone to make an argument against the concept of public-private partnerships. It makes great sense that you're considering those, and that's the primary reason why I came, is to make that point. But also to suggest that in addition to looking forward, those kinds of 3 Ps that you might work out going forward, why haven't any been done in the past? I think if you can unravel just why we haven't had them in the past, that will help you going forward. Being a former professor, I like props. This one is the headline from the Honolulu Advertiser from almost exactly 12 years ago, June 23rd, 2006. The headline, of course, rail cost estimate $3 billion. I think everybody knows it's gone up and up and up from before 2006, but everybody knows that. But let me read to you the first, let's say the second paragraph from this. I have 2 minutes. If somebody had asked me a question, I'd like to respond. But second paragraph of the article says, the new cost estimate is at least $200 million more than the previous estimates. But Mayor Mufi Hanneman said that does not necessarily mean more taxes will be needed, citing the possibility of public-private partnerships. The article goes on, including a quote from then Chairman of the City Council, Donovan Dela Cruz, saying, yeah, this is critical. I've talked to developers who said, yes, but it should have been done 12 years ago. That's when the planning should have been done. So while I'm not here to suggest it's a bad idea to talk about the possibility of public-private partnerships, I really think unless you can figure out why we haven't had any in the past, I think you're going to be coming up dry. And for what it's worth, I talked off the record to a former HART member some years ago and asked him why there hadn't at that point been any public-private partnerships. And he said, in his opinion, it was a combination of politics and incompetence. He wasn't sure what the weighting of the two was. Again, my point is, until you can figure out why your predecessors, I hold you guys in very high regard. Some of you I know individually. Everyone that I know is a really, really admirable person. I would ask you to look back at former HART board members, try to figure out why hasn't this happened before. And if you can answer that question, then I think there's hope going forward. Thank you for giving me 2.5 minutes.
Thank you.
Unless there's a question.
Any questions? Thank you again.
Anyone like to see my prop? Thank you.
Mel Kahele?
Chair Kim, I would want to reserve my statement for testimony up until the time we get to item 10 on the
Okay.
agenda.
Thank you. Natalie Iwasa?
Thank you, Chair. Board members, Natalie Iwasa for the record. When I saw this agenda, I was very surprised for 2 reasons. First of all of the executive sessions that you might go into. You know, we're spending billions of dollars. Every time somebody goes to the grocery store to buy a loaf of bread, they're paying for rail. We deserve to hear all of these issues discussed in public. So I ask you to do that on these very important items. With respect to the $44 million, again, I was very surprised because we heard over and over and over again during the budget session in council that HART had the money. There was no need to float any bonds for it. It was just a placeholder. We heard that even last week when the budget was passed, it was just a placeholder. And here you are ready to ask council to authorize bonds for this. So again, on this particular item, we deserve to understand why that is. When did people know that you guys were going to float bonds, and why wasn't that told to the council and the public prior to today, or prior to release of this agenda? So I'm very concerned about all of that. And then the last thing is, I do want to testify in the budgets when you come to that item. But with respect to the concern that the state auditor brought up and the fact that employees are being recorded when they're being interviewed for the state audit is a huge concern. I have 10 years of audit experience. You have a CPA here who has audit experience. You know, that should not happen. People are not going to be free to feel free to express their own concerns, and that is going to hamper the auditor in his audit. So I ask you to consider that too, even though it's not on here. You do have the ability to sunshine that item because there were board members who had questions about that the last month. So thank you for allowing me to testify.
Thank you. Anybody else wishing to testify at this time? If not, moving on to, we have to skip item number 3 as we don't have a voting quorum, but we're able to do being able to do non-voting items. So we're moving on to item number 4, which is the establishment of a permitted interaction group to appoint the Board of Directors' 9th voting member. As you know, Terry Fuji over here graciously accepted the job to take over Bobby Bunda's term, serve out the rest of the, it's 2 years? Sure seemed like, what, 7 years you were on, but it's 2 years. If you don't remember already. So the board is going to set up a PIG group that we call, we can go up to 7 volunteers. So instead of me appointing, I wish to see 7 volunteers put up their hands to be able to investigate and basically report back to the HR committee and the board of a person that might be of interest for us as the 9th voting member. So I got Terry. Anybody else? Kathy? Don't all rush up and throw up your hands now. We can have up to 7. Okay, Hoyt. Anybody else? Toby? Yeah, Wes, that's,
There's only like one, two.
that's 5. Okay, good. Come on, okay. Money, that's good. And,
Seven, right?
yeah, we don't need the 7, so. Okay, well, I want to thank you guys for volunteering, and we'll get that meeting set up to discuss what the goals are in looking at that. We're going to skip items 5, 6, and 7, and 8, as they are all voting items. We'll move to item number 9 and 10, strategic plan update and the discussion on the P3 itself. So is there anybody wishing to testify before it, or do you want to wait till after the presentation? Okay, we'll wait till after the presentation itself.
Okay,
Andrew.
good morning, Chair and members. You will recall a few months ago, I suppose, that we discussed the development of a strategic plan to guide HART into the future, if you will, and to guide all of our efforts in regard to delivering the project. So what we had designed was a process where we update you along the way. So that's what we would like to do today, is to discuss with you sort of the first draft of our strategic plan. Probably have one more review after this, and then take all of your comments and aim to finalize the plan by August. So that's what we would like to do today, and I have Liz Crenshaw with me today from our staff that worked very diligently with us on developing the plan. So Liz, I'd like to ask you to just begin the introduction of the draft, and then we won't discuss the entire plan today. We'll be distributing the draft to all of you following the meeting so that you can have a more detailed review. But what I would like to focus on today is one of the key focus areas, particularly the project delivery focus area, and have a little bit more discussion. And so I'll pick that up after Liz begins the presentation. So if I could turn it over to you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. As you know, the strategic plan was part of Andy's mandate in the first year. Can everybody hear me? There we go. No? Now?
Yeah, you can move just the
Just
mic
closer.
closer to your mouth, yeah.
There we go, there we go. As you all know, the strategic plan was part of Andy's mandate, part of his first year on the job, and I was commissioned to put together the first draft of it. So I think we'll just go over some of the elements. Purpose of the strategic plan, of course, is to guide the future of our work over the next 3-year period. We did decide that it would be a 3-year period, January 1st, 2019 through December 31st, 2021. We think that what this will do is validate HART's mission and its vision, and establish how we will move toward addressing our strategic goals and achieving the intended outcomes. It will also identify and clarify ways of fulfilling our mandate as an agency. It will prioritize key areas that will be a particular focus for HART over the next 3 years, and it will outline how we will meet those challenges, and it will also define HART's guiding principles. Next slide, please. Some of the elements of the strategic plan, there is a lot of background in the beginning of the plan, which you will see because we're going to distribute it to you. But the actual plan itself is toward the last half of the plan. And the following elements are part of that. HART's vision, which is what we want to be as a transit agency. Our mission, what we do. We have 8 key focus areas, and these are areas which we're going to focus on in order to attain our vision and our mission. Goals, what HART aims to achieve. Our objectives, which are specific steps that we'll implement in order to accomplish these goals. Strategies, which are detailed approaches and actions that we'll take to achieve the objectives. And then what the intended outcomes of all that is. So the vision statement was developed through a strategic planning group that we formed. We distributed a questionnaire, and this is the vision that we came up with. And I'll just read it. It's HART plans, designs, constructs, tests, activates, and prepares for operations and maintenance on an expanded county-wide rail system that provides safe, dependable, and modern transportation alternative for Honolulu, demonstrating HART's commitment to service excellence in supporting the economic needs and greater mobility for the Honolulu region. Well, that's a mouthful. The mission, which was originally passed as part of the charter when HART was created, has been amended due to the passage of Amendment 4. So the new mission is to plan, design, construct, test, activate, and prepare for operations and maintenance Honolulu's high-capacity fixed skyway rapid transit system. So as I mentioned earlier, we have 8 key focus areas, and I'll just go through them. We didn't go into detail on any of these in this presentation, but we'll just list them here. Proactive funds management, leadership capacity and capability, outreach, project delivery, continual environmental improvement, partnerships, safety and security, and extensions to the system. And as Andy mentioned earlier, he wants to focus on key focus area for today, which is the project delivery. And I'll turn it back over to Andy.
Okay, thank you, Liz. I should mention at the top that Liz has experience from other transit agencies, so she brought some of that experience to this effort. We've also, we benchmarked strategic plans from other transit agencies as well. So I believe there were, 7 or 8 that we looked at.
More than that.
Even more than that. What differentiates us a bit is that, especially with the passage of Charter Amendment number 4, HART really at this point is more of a special purpose entity that's existing to deliver this project. So plan it, design it, construct it, activate it, test, and make it ready for operations. So that we sort of have this singular focus, but along the way, I think the key focus areas are attempting to describe, in addition to delivering the project, some of our other objectives. So for example, sustainability. You know, how can we, as we're building this project and getting it ready for operations, how can we ensure that you know, we're conserving energy, we're good stewards of the environment, we take into account sea level rise, issues like that, but also to set the project on a course for long-term sustainability. And you know, that gets somewhat into the whole P3 discussion, which we'll have after this presentation. But what I would like to just focus on the remaining time that we have for discussing this issue is what we call focus area number 4, which is the project delivery, which of course is at the heart of what we do. So the main goal and objective that is associated with project delivery is to deliver the project for no more than $8.165 billion, using our existing funding. You know, when I came in last year, we had just finished the special session. The funding was made available, put into place to complete the project, and I think the message was loud and clear that we have to stay on budget and on schedule. So from that point on, that has been our focus. We have not increased the capital cost at all, really since January of 2017. The project had, of course, suffered from significant cost overruns and schedule overruns, and we wanted to stabilize the project and turn that situation around. So that is a key focus, and now we have instituted risk management and other techniques to make sure that we focus on staying on budget and on schedule from this point forward. Key objective associated with project delivery is that we're focused on being ready for interim service by December of 2020, and then being ready for full service over the 20 miles by December of 2025. Both of those objectives go hand in hand in our minds. Interim service is very important in that it gives us a near-term target. We have many items that have to be checked off in order to have the system ready for operation and really ready to put passengers on the train. So that involves safety, state oversight, and really just completing all the construction, completing all the testing, checking all the boxes that are needed to certify the system and put it into service. So in project management, if we can achieve the near-term goal of activating and readying for service 10 miles, then that puts us on a trajectory for making our schedule and our budget for full service in 2025. So we both go hand in hand. Going to page 8. Sorry, I'm not watching the screen, but just go back to page 8. This is the map of the system, of course, and I think most people are aware that the project, in terms of construction, was divided into segments. So we have the West Oahu-Farrington Highway segment, the Kamehameha Highway segment, Airport segment, and City Center segment. And I'll be discussing all of those briefly. If you go to page 9, in terms of project delivery, over the years, HART has used different project delivery methods, including design, bid, build, which is, I suppose you could say, the traditional method that had been used in the United States over the years for delivering these kind of projects. We've also now migrated to design, build, which combines the design and the construction under one entity and has a lot of advantages that we're seeing, especially as we continue through the airport segment. And then design, build, operate, maintain. We have a core systems contractor on board who has a DBOM contract, which also ties in the operations and maintenance. Going to page 10. Our strategy is sort of like a ground game in football or in battle, sort of from west to east, and that's the way the project has been designed and implemented. So in the west, we now are at the point where we have our 2 guideway segments totaling 10 miles that was constructed by Kiewit. Those are done, and we're actively negotiating with Kiewit to close those contracts out. Why is that important? Because as we close these contracts out, we make the overall project smaller, and we de-risk the rest of the project. And the goal is to return funds to our contingency. So I'm happy to report that feel the negotiations with Kiewit are going well, and of course we'll be reporting to the board when we come to the point where we can conclude those negotiations and have a settlement. But I feel like those are going well. We're on a good trajectory, hopefully by the end of the summer, to close those 2 major guideway contracts out. The third contract is at the ROC, the Rail Operations Center. We're hoping to close that out this month. That's 100% complete. So again, major contract, completed, closed out, make the project smaller, de-risk the project. In the west, we're also actively building 9 stations right now under 2 different construction contracts. Those stations are ranging anywhere from about 30% complete to about 52% complete. We had a number of issues regarding these stations. We have 2 different designers, we have 2 different contractors, we have core systems interface information. We are dealing with a number of issues, but we feel like many of those issues are resolved, and we're actively resolving other issues, and we're going to get these stations done by the middle of next year. So once we're on that trajectory of closing out those major construction contracts in the west, we now have our core systems contract coming through the west as well, those first 10 miles. This is the Ansaldo work. They're actively installing all of their systems. So just as a reminder, Ansaldo not only develops the vehicles, the trains, but they also have installation, electrical installation, all of the cabling works, all of the communications and signaling, power supply. What forms the basis of the operating system of the railway is being installed by Ansaldo and their contractors through the West right now. The other very important thing that we're doing with Ansaldo is a few weeks ago we energized the yard, and I think most of you heard about that. The yard is where we store our trains and we dispatch our trains onto the system. But it's very important from a project management standpoint to activate the yard, because the yard represents a mini system in itself. It's not sufficient just to install all the systems and test all the systems individually and make sure that the comms work and the power supply works, but they have to all be integrated. And this is where there have been many issues on other rail projects in the past in terms of the systems integration, making sure that all the systems work with each other, they're coordinated, and there's no interferences and there's no technical issues that prevent one system from working with the other. What we have done over the last few weeks is focus the Ansaldo team on activating the yard and beginning to test the yard as if it's a mini system in itself, because just about all of the systems I mentioned are present on the yard. We even have a test track designed into the yard. We can shuttle trains in driverless mode, and we can prove out that the interfaces work, they're properly installed. And then what we do once the yard is fully checked out is we just radiate out from there, and we start activating section by section until we have all 10 miles of the west segment completed, and we're on our way to interim service in 2020. So this is a very important strategy that we have been deploying over the last few months. So now as we move through the east, I mentioned that we have the design build contract going through the east. Contractor is STG, Shimmick Trailer Granite, and they're approximately 23% complete. The progress through the airport segment is really amazing in terms of just getting the drilled shafts in place, the foundations. The columns are coming up, and very soon we'll be actually starting on the guideway segments, the horizontal guideway segments. In the casting yard, we have a number of those segments already cast and being ready for installation through the airport segment. Progress is going very well. STG is performing very well. And that segment is on time and actually under budget because we had a deductive change order a couple of months ago. So that's maybe a little known fact, but through this airport segment, we are on schedule and under budget. And our strategy, of course, is to maintain that kind of performance, that kind of progression through the airport area. That would take us up to Middle Street. So the next segment is City Center, and that's where we are today. What was it, 2-3 weeks ago, we awarded the contract for City Center utilities. So one of the major lessons learned from the West is that we should advance the utility work, and it's quite tricky coming through the Dillingham corridor up through Kaka'ako, major utilities, both wet and dry, that have to be relocated. So we've been planning for that for a number of months, put out the procurement in a unique method using an IDIQ contract, again learning lessons from the past. Awarded that contract to non-incorporated. We had the non-executives in for a series of meetings to make sure that they were on board, because they're very important. They're our major partner on the project. They have given us assurances that they are on board. They're team players. And what's really unique about the IDIQ contract is that there's no change orders in the process. Instead, we develop task orders up front together with non. So we sit down as a team. We look at the work that needs to be done in a series of task orders. We have a schedule of prices that were part of the bid, and we assemble the work and the price for each task order as a team, using the fixed prices that were part of the procurement. And in this way, we progress the work task order by task order, and there's always unknowns with utility relocations, obstacles, and what we have devised through this IDIQ method is a way to progress the work, be able to not stop because the contractor only gets paid when he works, so he's incentivized to find solutions, but also to be able to move around. So if we have a major obstacle that's going to need some kind of redesign or something like that, we can jump to another task order and continue to progress the job. We also are very conscious of the community as we come up this congested corridor. Just yesterday, we had a meeting with the Dillingham Business Association. They expressed their concerns about how we may interfere with their businesses. We're very sensitive to that, and we believe the IDIQ contract provides us the opportunity to be very flexible and meet their particular needs, make sure their businesses stay open, do night work as much as we can, move around, and not open up major portions of the road, but open up sections so that we can get sections of work done in perhaps 90 to 120 days, move on to the next session. So we're not interfering with people for 6, 9, 12, 16 months at a time. So this is what we've devised, and it's a major part of the strategy in terms of project delivery. So that work will progress for a few years as we come up the Dillingham corridor, Kaka'ako, into downtown and over to Ala Moana. It's a major effort. It's a $400 million contract, so you can get an idea of how much work that is. But this is the launching of the city center, and that then leads to the final piece in the puzzle, which is the guideway and stations for city center. So I think I'm on page 13 now. And as you know, when I came in, even during the interview stage, when I was interviewing for this project, I was talking about public-private partnerships. The reason for that is that I think I recognized that coming into city center was going to be challenging, coming into the urban core. Fortunately, we have a lot of good lessons learned that we are already applying and will apply continuously throughout the city center. But I wanted to make sure that we consider all of the global best practices that are out there for these large infrastructure projects. It's not uncommon, as everybody knows, to run into cost overruns and schedule overruns. But the industry has reacted over the years. And this is why you see a progression in project delivery methods from design, bid, build to design, build, and today into design, build, finance, operate, maintain. This is the global best practice in my mind today. It's being used all over the world. The U.S. was actually a bit slow to the game, a bit resistant, a bit more tied to tradition. So what we have seen with DBFOM is that it really originated in the UK, and then quickly after that in Australia. And then Canada was an early adopter, and you heard a little bit about that today from one of the testifiers. I was on a project in Vancouver back in 2001, looking at the Canada line in Vancouver, which was one of the early P3 projects in Canada, which was a very successful project, involved private finance and long-term operations and maintenance. So I felt it was incumbent on us to look at global best practices as we go into the city center. And maybe I won't say too much more because that's the next agenda item, but that is the foundation and the final piece in the puzzle of really sticking to our goals and objectives of staying on budget and on schedule from this point forward, and being able to deliver this project successfully with long-term sustainability. So that's really sort of the foundation and the key to the strategic plan that we're developing. So as Liz mentioned, next step is for us to distribute the draft for you so that we can solicit all of your comments, go through one more round, I believe, of draft, and then we'll be able to finalize the plan in August. So at this point, I can open it up to any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Okay. Vote yes. Go ahead.
Quick question, Andy.
Yes.
So do you think, you mentioned about the cost containment, sticking on budget and so forth. Do you think it's worthwhile to visit in the vision and mission whether you should put words like effectively and efficiently design, plan, design, so forth, and build a sustainable system? You talk about sustainability, you talk about cost containment, so I'm just wondering if maybe that should be a part of the vision and mission. Just asking.
Yeah. Certainly take that comment up.
Certainly.
Yep.
Amber?
Thank you, Andy, for doing this. I know that was part of the discussion we had when you first came on board, and I appreciate the attention to the technical details and the overall scheme of the project. And I think what you've done is a good foundation for your strategic plan. And I look forward to reading it in more detail. I have a couple of comments on, like Wes, on overall vision and mission, because I think what you've said is appropriate, it's correct, it's accurate, it's technically correct, but I also think that the strategic plan of HART has to be a little broader than that, and it has to be responsive to the public. It has to have a public purpose. It has to restore or to ensure public trust in the rail system. And I think that type of language is possibly, you should consider adding to the mission or the whatever appropriate place it is, because the whole purpose of rail when it was sold to the public was to bring transportation equity to the community, to the island, and that's an important component. The other part I think that I would ask you to consider is, as part of the mission, even though HART's focus is building rail and the construction, and it is a very special, it has been reduced to a special purpose function with the charter amendment, I also think it behooves us to have an integrated approach to ensure that we're working cooperatively and collaboratively to build a total public transportation system, integrated not just with rail, bus, and other mobile transportation means. And so I wouldn't want to lose sight of that. It obviously isn't the main focus of, I mean, you're right, the main focus is to build it within budget and within the schedule. But certainly we can't lose sight of the fact that we're part of an integrated public transportation plan for the entire city and county of Honolulu.
Thank you very much. I think those are all excellent comments. If you go to page 6, what I chose to do today is really just focus on what we call focus area number 4, which is the project delivery. But when you receive the draft, you'll see it is broader than that. I think we do touch on all of the issues you mentioned, but I would appreciate the feedback, and we'll of course take a look at it too, to make sure that we have a robust enough discussion on all of those comments, which I think are all very much on point.
I'm sorry, and one last comment. And I assume that the inclusion of the DBFOM part of the strategic plan will be subject to change because that has not been decided yet. It's certainly your immediate strategic plan, but that could change over the course of the next couple of months given the way the board may, I mean, I'm not foreclosing a conclusion on that. Okay.
Yeah, fully understood. This is a draft, so we'll finalize it based on where we are at the time. Yeah.
Any other comments, questions? Yes, Kathy.
A couple things. Procedurally, thank you very much for the opportunity to comment on this, and I think it's very refreshing to see this draft. Do we give our comments to you, or how we're going to deal with the individual comments that board members may have? Directly give them to Andy?
Yes, you can directly give it to him.
Okay. Yeah, and then the second thing would be if we could have some clarification of where the board's role is in terms of responsibility for adopting and implementing the strategic plan. If it's just for the executive director, that's fine. I just want a clarification.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, go ahead.
I think Amber's comments were excellent, and again, I echo her comment about thanking Andy and his team for putting this together. As I looked at it, and again, I'm just basing my comment on the information in front of us, knowing that there's a more detailed plan coming, but it feels more tactical than strategic, and so sort of piling on with Amber's comment, I urge you to think bigger and less tactical. Anyway, I look forward to reading the comprehensive.
I think project delivery by its nature is somewhat tactical, but I think the other focus areas, I take your point, should be more strategic. Yeah.
And then, Mr. What is the timing for, well, what are the next steps, and when should we expect the plan?
We actually have, I think don't we have a slide on next steps?
We do.
Okay.
It's the last
Well,
page.
I think this month we will distribute our draft and solicit comments back. And then in the July, August timeframe, we would have another intermediate review, if you will. More comments at that point, with the goal of finalizing by the end of August. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, Andy, you want to go on to the P3 presentation as well?
Can you give while she's pulling up the PowerPoint, what I can do is start with a sort of a status of where we are with the P3. So before I get into that, let me start with a status of where we are and then make a few introductory comments. Well, as you know, since November, December timeframe, we had engaged Ernst & Young Infrastructure Advisors to come on board and assist HART in analyzing the viability of introducing a P3 into the project, specifically to help us complete the project with regard to City Center Guideway and stations, as well as the Pearl Highlands Transit Center, and then to look at the feasibility together with the city of introducing long-term operations and maintenance into the design build, into the P3 project delivery method. So Ernst & Young has concluded that study. They made a presentation to you in the past month or so. And the feedback that we had from all of you, as well as others, was that we really needed to develop a white paper staff recommendation to pick up where Ernst & Young left off and really to focus it more on our specific strategy for City Center and Pearl Highlands and operations and maintenance, specifically related to this project as opposed to more of a general study. I think Ernst & Young did a valuable service in that they looked at our unique situation. They built a financial model which aimed to duplicate what potential bidders would do. Because one of the first things a bidder would do is build their own financial model and assess affordability of a design, build, finance, operate, maintain solution. So we needed to do that within the agency and with the consultant to assess the affordability before we could ever recommend moving forward. So they did that, and they did one of their findings was that it is affordable, even at the point of coming in sort of midstream for City Center and Pearl Highlands. it was affordable, deemed affordable to implement a DBFOM at this point. But what we're doing now is we are developing the white paper as you recommended, with a more specific strategy of what we would include in a RFP if we decide to move forward. So that is well underway. We are also working very closely with various city departments, because this will be a joint procurement if we move forward with the city because of their role of operations and maintenance. So we have been taking the time to have a series of meetings with various city departments, BFS, DTS, and CORE and other departments, going through all of the details regarding DBFOM. As a matter of fact, this week, the last 2 days, and continuing today, we've been conducting risk workshops, specifically comparing design, build, finance, operate, maintain to, if we didn't go with P3, to just straight design, build, and then leaving the O&M essentially to DTS once the project is completed. So the risk workshop is intended to look at all of the risk associated with the two basic methods, and to put costs and schedule impacts against those risks. And together with our project management consultant, they would then run a Monte Carlo simulation of the risks and be able to come out with a comparison of DB versus DBFOM. So that is ongoing, and our intent is to factor in and use that information from these risk workshops and put that into the white paper so that we can present that to you. As a result, we're not here today to ask you for any type of decision or vote. We're going to defer that hopefully until to next month's board meeting, and make sure that you have the white paper in plenty of time so that you can review the contents of the white paper and ask questions that you may have. HART right now is currently engaged in answering a number of questions from the city departments. They have developed very good questions as they go through the various differences between design build and design build, finance, operate, maintain. So we're in the process of answering all of those questions as well, and having a full consultation with the various city departments. So what I would like to present to you today is where we are in the process with the white paper. There's two major areas that I probably won't be discussing too much detail, because those are under deliberation right now. One of them is the question of the core systems contract, specifically the Ansaldo contract, because they do have a contract for the entire project, including City Center right now. So the issue is, how can we most effectively bring them under the P3, and then find a way to extend the operations and maintenance over a much longer period of time, which we believe would have major benefits to the city. The other major issue is the discussion of an off-ramp. So whatever we do, as I just finished reviewing in the strategic plan, is that we have to stay on budget and on schedule, with the focus on interim service in 2020 and final full service in 2025. So we want to make sure that if we find that the project under DBFOM is not affordable for some reason, or has some other impact that would cause us to delay the schedule, then we want to have an off-ramp so that we can proceed without any delay on traditional, let's say, traditional design build, so that we can finish the city center. So we'll be coming back to you shortly on those two issues, as well as the entire white paper. And again, we're conducting the risk workshop this week. We should have those sort of downloaded by next week, and be able to finish the white paper in a matter of 10 days or so. So that's our plan moving forward. So let me move on to the PowerPoint, but before I do that, I just want to mention that I did pass out to most of you, and we'll make sure that those of you that don't have this receive it, and any member of the public as well. I can make these available. But I want to bring your attention to a couple of documents. One is an article from Public Works Financing of October 2016, title being P3 Infrastructure's Amazing Underappreciated Track Record. And this is an article that was written by Robert Poole of the Reason Foundation, and you may know that because the Reason Foundation is traditionally an anti-rail organization. They've always, or many times, taken an anti-rail position. But in this case, Mr. Poole is talking about the amazing record of P3 infrastructure, specifically design, build, finance, operate, maintain. As I mentioned, the U.S. was a bit slow to this methodology, but in the 2015-2016 timeframe, there was over $9 billion worth of transportation project financings that were closed in the United States, including the Maryland Purple Line and the LaGuardia Airport Central Terminal. Worldwide, P3 developers and financiers arranged financing for 30 major projects in that time frame, worth over $30 billion. So I think you can get a sense that globally and in the U.S., this is now catching on as really the global best practice on these very large infrastructure type of undertakings, specifically geared to the issue of how do you stay on schedule, on budget, which has always been the issue on these type of projects. And I'd just like to just quote one more statement from the article, and again, I'll make the article available to those that don't have it. We now have solid evidence that the incentives of a concession company that will design, build, finance, operate, and maintain a project for 30 to 50 years are A, innovative in the design, B, build it to minimize life cycle costs, C, guarantee proper long-term maintenance, all with significant penalties for poor performance. This is a powerful set of benefits that is still poorly understood. So again, I encourage you to read this article and be happy to answer any questions once you do. I also distributed to many of you a PowerPoint that was conducted by the Los Angeles World Airport. This is the most recent DBFOM in transportation that was closed to build an automated transit system at LA Airport, about a $2 billion project. LA has an excellent credit, LA Airport has an excellent credit rating. They could have paid for the whole project themselves, but they made a decision to go with DBFOM specifically to gain the long-term risk transfer and the high-quality performance over a long period of time. They were very concerned about delivering this project in a very congested central terminal area of the airport, which is the third largest airport, or actually second largest airport now in the United States. And those are the specific reasons why they chose DBFOM when they could have easily paid for the project themselves. And that was awarded to a consortium over the last few weeks, and with an early works contract, they've already begun construction there. So these are, I think, two very important articles that I really urge you to take a look at over the next month. So with that, if you allow me, I'd like to just run through some information on where we are with the P3 project delivery initiative that we undertook. So this is the remaining work that we have on the project. Really the city center guideway stations. This is not awarded yet. We did attempt to award this a couple of years ago, but it was delayed and then eventually canceled, mainly because of lack of funding at the time. And then most recently, because we ended up with only one bidder, only one design build bidder. And for those reasons, we canceled the procurement. So this is now urgent that we get this under procurement so that we can complete the project. But we also have the Pearl Highlands Transit Center, which has not yet been procured or constructed. So what we're aiming to do under the DBFOM is combine these two major pieces of infrastructure, which would total about $1.4 billion worth of new work. If I go to page 3, purposes and objectives of the DBFOM program. You saw these as goals in the Ernst & Young report, so I'm restating them here, perhaps in a slightly different way, but really trying to crystallize what we're trying to do here. trying to provide a life cycle approach, recognizing that the rail transit project is a long-term community asset. We're not just here to build it and wish it good luck. We want to make sure that once it's built, we spent a lot of money building it. We want to make sure this is an asset that is clean, safe, reliable, and is a major community asset over a long period of time. So what we're looking at now is a 30-year design, build, finance, operate, maintain partnership with a private sector partner. Also, to assure a process that incorporates budgetary discipline and achieves more certainty, largely eliminating the possibility of change orders. It really dawned on me when I first started and I saw the governor sign the bill from the special session and the mayor sign the bill, that what plagued this project was a lack of certainty. And I really felt it was incumbent on HART to be able to respond to our elected officials that we have a way to provide more cost certainty and schedule certainty. And we believe that DBFOM is a key to delivering that, especially through the complex city center section. So those are really the next two bullets: schedule certainty and budget certainty. And eliminating the possibility of change orders. We have a lot of data now from DBFOM around the world that, although not unheard of, change orders are largely eliminated. We're going to have a very robust due diligence period during the procurement process. What we're talking about is private sector partner who is going to take on a 30-year contract. They're going to make sure that they understand all the risks. They're going to arrange private finance, and that project finance is a huge hammer to make sure that the project stays on time, on schedule, and that all of the major risks of the project have been identified and mitigated. And the track record is excellent when you look at the history around the world of really minimizing change orders, which is something that we've all had to deal with, and it's not fun to deal with change orders. And then the final bullet I have here is to encourage increased and robust competition among both U.S.-based and international, what we call Tier 1 contractors and organizations. As I mentioned, under our previous procurement for a city center, we ended up only with one bidder. And we're concerned about that if we go design build, about what is the competitive landscape. Kiewit was one of our major builders in the West. They've made it pretty clear that they don't seem interested in the city center at this point. So we're concerned about what kind of competition we would get under design build. There is, for segmental bridge construction, there's a pretty limited field of players in that area that would be interested in coming to Hawaii. So we had an industry day associated with the P3 back in February. We had 71 firms show up, and we had many of the major Tier 1 P3 players, companies like Fluor and Bechtel and ACS and John Lang, and companies from Asia as well. And a number of these organizations have been keeping in touch with us. And we've heard about 4 teams that are already developing in anticipation of a positive decision to go forward with DBFOM. There may be more, but we have information based on what we hear that 4 teams have already been developing, waiting, and they ask us, when is the RFP coming out? So that's another major objective, is to really attract these Tier 1 companies and have a robust competition for our City Center and Pearl Highlands initiatives. Moving on to page 4, really transferring risk to the private sector and optimizing the risk allocation between the public and the private sector, I think, is really key. As we know in the West, we've suffered from delays, whether it was lawsuits, whether it was the change of economy, and I really feel like the public sector was overexposed to all of these issues. So in P3, we're going to have an engagement with our bidders over the next many months in terms of really optimizing the risk allocation between government and the private sector to make sure that the entity that's best able to manage and mitigate the risk is the one who has the risk. And In P3, what we're seeing around the world is that the private sector is increasingly taking on more and more risks. So, for example, in my own experience, 20 years ago, we would never, transit companies would never sign up for 20-year and 30-year operations and maintenance at a fixed price. But today they're doing that. And LA Airport, for example, received a 25-year fixed price for operations and maintenance. So that's just one example of the type of risk that the private sector is willing to take these days. And what they get in exchange is a long-term, constant revenue stream as long as they perform. And that's what they're looking for. We want to also promote technical innovation and best practices. Built into the DBFOM process during the bid phase is what we call alternate technical concepts, where the private sector is encouraged to take a look at our RFP and come up with innovations and make recommendations that are really reserved for them and their bid of how to do things better, faster, cheaper. One of those, we believe, is that we've allowed some 63 months to complete City Center in Pearl Highlands. Maybe it's because I've worked in China. That seems like an inordinate amount of time, where we've taken the utility risk out of this project. That's being done in advance. We really believe that the private sector, through DBFOM, is going to come up with a faster way to do this, which benefits everybody. The faster we can get done means less interference with the community. That's one of the best mitigations available to us. So we're very encouraged by that possibility. We want to promote technical innovation and best practices, as I said. Some people believe that because we only have 4.5 miles left, that there's not a lot of room for technical innovation. I disagree. I think we're going to uncover ideas from the private sector that we can benefit from, and that will, if not totally reduce our costs, will help us provide the cost certainty that we're looking for and the schedule certainty that we're looking for. I mentioned that if we proceed with DBFOM, we're talking about a joint procurement with the city, because we really believe that there's benefits in combining the construction part of the project and the long-term operations and maintenance. And in terms of making this a sustainable asset going forward, we also want to take into account really life cycle management, including long-term capital asset replacement. You see in places like Washington, D.C., and in New York, and various other places where the system ages, things wear out, and then the investment is not made to keep those assets in a state of good repair. With DBFOM, with a 30-year type arrangement, this becomes the responsibility of the private sector. They have, the onus is on them to maintain high performance standards for the entire life cycle of the project, and they have to bake into their solution all of the capital asset needs of the project, and we think this has great benefits to the city. And then finally, synergies in building Pearl Highlands. I know 2 or 3 years ago, I believe there was an effort to do TOD in Pearl Highlands, and did not succeed at that time. And what I understand is that the developers, it was too heavy a burden for the developers to look at building the infrastructure out there in terms of the parking garage and the transit center. So we believe by packaging in those infrastructure projects, the garage, the transit center, in with City Center, taking care of that in the DBFOM, that is less burden for TOD developers to come in and look at the surrounding DOD opportunities and make that pencil out. And at the same time, our DBFOM partner can find synergies in mobilizing for both Pearl Highlands and City Center at the same time. So I think that's a key goal as well of this effort. So if I can go to page 5 now. What would be in the recommended structure of a DBFOM? Well, it would be that $1.4 billion worth of construction that I just mentioned, City Center, Guideway stations, and Pearl Highlands. It would also include the long-term operations and maintenance of the system, and the completion of the core systems for the entire project, And then, very importantly, the integrated testing of the entire system so that it's ready for operations and maintenance. If I go to page 6, what would not be in the P3, but would continue the way that we've organized it so far, would be the west side and the airport guideway segment. So these are the ongoing works that I just spoke of previously. On the west side, we're closing out the guideway contracts, we're closing out the maintenance facility, we're completing the west side stations. Those would continue with the contractors we have under HART. Same with the AGS contract with our consortium STG. We would continue that work outside of the P3. And the funding and the financing by HART would continue for those contracts. We're scheduled to have all of that work complete by mid-2022, and then we'll embark on testing and commissioning leading up to, well, this is for the entire project. But the west side will be, through the airport, that is correct. That'll finish in mid-2022, and then we'll complete testing and commissioning in 2023. If I go to page 7, talking about the city center guideway stations and Pearl Highlands, as I mentioned, this is $1.4 billion worth of work. The major funding for this work, of course, comes through GET, TAT, some city funding, and the full funding grant agreement. This will continue exactly as it is now. We're not proposing any change of law or any change of funding. And as you know, the GET and the TAT expire in 2030, and we're not proposing any change to that. So if you go to page 8, in terms of private finance, I think one of the things that came out of the study that was done by Ernst & Young is that based on those funding sources and the fact that they sunset in 2030, it made sense to devise a private finance scheme that matched the time frame for those funding sources. So what we're looking at right now is to ask the private sector to arrange private finance, more of a short-term nature, that would essentially pay off all of the capital debt by 2030, so matches the time frame for the funding. We would not consider any debt going beyond 2030 at this point. That reduces the cost of financing. And the reason why we want to have private finance is to maximize the risk transfer and really put a hammer, if you will, on schedule and budget so that the private sector has their own lenders involved in making sure that the project proceeds on time, on budget, and defect-free. We think this is the risk transfer that we're looking for on the project. And the modeling that we've done suggests that the P3 partner would finance about 2/3 of the project through the construction period. So in other words, HART would make construction milestone payments up to 2030 worth about 1/3 of up to 2025, which is when the full system opens. We would make milestone payments of about 1/3 of the capital cost. And then the train would open, the contractor has to run the system according to a very high performance standard, and then we would make a series of availability payments with a 5-year tail beyond 2025, which would encourage that the project is not only completed on time and on budget, but that all defects and system performance are resolved in a timely manner. So this is the type of modeling that we're doing and would be the basis of our P3 structure that we would recommend to you next month. Okay. If I go to page, well, that's where we are right now. And as I mentioned, we still have work to do that's being discussed in our risk workshops in terms of how we handle the core systems contract how we potentially roll that into the P3, and then how we arrange the long-term operations and maintenance of the project. And we're actively talking with the various city departments on both of those issues, and we'll be reporting back to you in our white paper in a matter of 2 weeks with recommendations in those areas as well. So perhaps I'll stop there and entertain any questions that you may have.
Board members, any questions this time? If not, one of them, yes, go ahead.
So Andy, just to make it clear, on page 8, when you say post-construction and the availability of GET and TAT, just want to make sure that you understand the difference between what's allowable and what's not, because it's supposed to be used for construction costs primarily, and with the description of post-construction, you want to make sure that you exclude those unallowable costs too.
Right. Well, really, all we're talking about here is that if we were doing design build, as we progress the construction project, we would be making milestone payments. And then when we reach substantial completion prior to revenue service, we would have paid the contractor at least 95% of his costs. And then at final completion, we would be at 100% payment to our design build contractor. And then the system would enter into revenue service, and we would, essentially that would be under the leadership of DTS, with Ansaldo and others providing the actual service of operations and maintenance, and they would be paid on a pay-as-you-go basis for that service. The difference with DBFOM that we're recommending with the short-term finance is that rather than pay essentially 100% of the construction costs by the time of revenue service, we would only pay approximately 33% of the construction costs. And the contractor would use his own financing to carry out his construction. So now what we have is a situation where that same contractor is involved in the operations and maintenance of the system, and he has to successfully operate the train according to the performance standards that we set for them. And we measure that on a monthly basis. And as long as he's meeting his performance standards, and that would involve the operation of the train, the cleanliness of the stations, the operations of the elevators and escalators, but also to make sure that the construction was defect-free, that everything was installed properly, everything is working, everything is completed. As long as all of those conditions are true, we would enter into a series of availability payments over the next 5 years to pay him the rest of his construction costs. And then the operations and maintenance would be paid on a pay-as-you-go basis. So that's the difference between carrying out design build and introducing an element of private finance.
Who pays the payments to the P3 party over the next 30 years?
Well, HART would be involved in paying the debt portion or the capital portion.
No, I mean after the TAT and GET surcharges or taxes are power.
Right. So when
Who
when
pays
all
it?
yeah. So at 2030, by that time, all of the debt of the project is paid for, and TAT and GET expires.
Right.
So what you're left with now is O&M costs, and those are presumably city funds at that point.
Because whoever bids this contract is building into their 30-year fee the cost of them paying for 2/3 of the capital improvements and the operating and maintenance of the project. So I guess, you know, just logically looking at this, we've always assumed that as the city moves forward, they will pay O&M, but in truth, with P3, it's not just O&M, it's a recapture of the expense that the developer or the P3 entity is putting forth in order to receive payments for the next 30 years.
Right, but all we're talking about with the recommended approach is a 5-year tail on that debt repayment. And the reason we want to do that is we want to enforce the schedule certainty and the cost certainty. So we want to enforce our risk transfer so that the private sector is incentivized to finish the project, make sure that all the punch lists and defects are resolved, and that the train is successfully put into operation. So we're only talking about a 5-year tail beyond the opening of the system. So at 2030, the debt is paid off for the capital part of the project. TAT and GET expire, and what you're left with is operating payments for the running of the train, which is the same as what we were going to do anyway.
It's going to be 25 more years, right, after, if P3 is initiated in 2019, let's just say, and then 2025, everything gets up and running, and then the 5 more years for the TAT and GET, there's still 20 years left that the city's going to be paying?
Well, presumably they'll be running this train for 100 years.
Yeah.
So it's pay as you go every year to operate and maintain the train.
I want to understand what that payment would look like in comparison to what a just pure O&M would look like. So anyway, that's where I was driving at. And the second thing is, I'm concerned about the time and effort being put into P3 because it feels like the focus is entirely there and not on the DB option, although we've talked about parallel tracks and how that might impact the possibility of increased costs due to delays. So I hope that in your presentation that you put in adequate, you pay adequate attention to the fact that if we do not approve P3, that there's a very clear and defined track for us to achieve our goals that you've outlined in your strategic plan, which is to come in on within budget and also on time.
Right. So, you know, if you recall one of the slides from the EY presentation where they show the structure of a DBFOM, what's underpinning any DBFOM is DB. So that is embedded in the P3. So staff currently is finalizing our RFP documents related to DB. So whether we make the decision to go DBFOM or not, we are preparing our DB specifications. So I hope that assures you that either way, we're readying those documents and we'll be ready to move either way.
I'm very skeptical.
You're skeptical that we're preparing those documents?
Yeah, it just feels like organizationally more effort is being put into
No.
DBFOM than it is to completing this project in general and on time and on budget. And I just feel like there's not enough attention being paid just from my purview to completing this project if DBFOM does not occur.
Yeah. Well, we have our engineering department is really not that involved in this P3 analysis or exploration. They really have not been very involved, and they're focused on delivering the projects that we have, as well as preparing the documents for City Center. So, that's part of my management responsibility to make sure that I'm going to be late on P3 if I don't have the DB documents ready. So we are working on both.
Amber.
Maybe you can clear this up when you present your white paper or further analysis, but I just want to ask follow-up questions on this 5-year tail. And maybe my understanding is off, okay? What you just said was 1/3 before 2025 and 2/3 between 2025 and 2030. And I know you're using 2030 as the drop dead date for paying off construction because that's when GET-TAT expires. And I don't think it should be correct, but I may be wrong, that the only payments that would be made to the P3 contractor would be the 2/3 financing for the construction, because the O&M is going to start, it's going to start in 2020 actually, but it certainly will kick into full operations. So the $110 million or whatever the operating costs will be, that's going to kick in certainly from revenue service date. And I can't imagine that a DBFOM contractor is going to say, okay, the only thing we're going to get for 5 years between 2025 and 2030 is to recapture 2/3 of our financing costs for the capital costs without getting the 110 or so million for O&M. So I just want to make sure that there's some clarity in that. But then I want to switch to DB, because under a design build, as I understood it, when we were going down the design build path, the design build contractor is going to be paid the 95% relatively soon after the completion of service construction. So that would be around 2025, 2026. And then there'll be holdbacks, obviously, for punch lists and things like that, and who knows how long that will go on. But the gap between 2025 and 2030 really had to do with the fact that the HART and the city would have to finance the construction costs. And so the 2025 and 2030 time period, and why the GETTAT continues for that period of time, is for HART and the city to pay back the financing costs incurred to front load the construction costs or the capital costs to pay off the contractor. And so regardless of whether we go DBFOM or DB, that 5-year tail period is paying off the financing costs of the capital program. Is that correct?
Yes, I think you're right. But the difference is that with private finance in that tail, we get this additional enforcement on the risk transfer.
But I would
Right.
like to know, when you're doing the white paper and analyzing it, the costs involved between the two models, because certainly for DBFOM, I would assume that there would be a higher financing costs because they can't bond at the same level that the city can, and because they're front loading the cost for themselves, and so there's going to be a financing cost that I assume is going to be greater. And that doesn't mean that we would want to reject a DBFOM, because there are other reasons to go with a DBFOM. Because risk transfer, to me, is all about money, how much you're going to pay for risk transfer. And the cost of that could be an acceptable cost for us, but that's part of knowing these kinds of factors before we make a decision.
Right, and I think you're right. If this was just a financing solution, then it would be very difficult to say, let's pick private finance over public finance. But it's not just a financing solution, it's a total project delivery solution. So there's things like innovation, there's things like higher performance standards, really the outcomes that we're looking for, adherence to schedule, adherence to budget. So there's a number of outcomes that, we have to decide what we want as government, as the public sector, as, for the benefit of the public. What do we want in exchange for somebody coming in, partnering with us and delivering this? And I think the experience, we tried to show, Ernst & Young tried to show some of it, is that even taking into account that private finance is generally more expensive than public finance, the total outcome, the experience has been excellent, where you see 10, 15, 20% cost savings as compared to traditional delivery. Because you have to look at all of the factors involved, as you mentioned. Now, with short-term finance, we've reached out to some of the potential players out there about that idea of saying, look, instead of, we know there are a number of firms out there really are looking for 30-year deals where there's equity investment and long-term finance, and they make a return on equity. But we talked to some of the other companies out there that have financing arms that really support their construction and asset management capabilities. And what they told us is, if you're looking at just a short-term finance, we can probably finance on our own balance sheet. We don't think we need any equity. We think it'll all be debt financing. So, it starts to reduce the difference between the cost of public and private finance. So it's really the total outcome that has to be analyzed, not just kind of picking on the financing aspect, because I don't think we'd ever do it if it was just based on that alone. Yeah.
But I guess I'm not convinced, and don't get me wrong, I'm very friendly towards the DBFOM concept, but I'm also not convinced that the cost savings that you refer to based upon other projects would necessarily apply to our case, because we're not doing it as the whole 20-mile project. We're doing it as, a segment that is a capital cost of 1.4, 1.6 billion, and that the cost savings is going to be in the capital side as opposed to the entire package.
Yeah. Now,
which
I think,
includes
just
an
to
O&M.
respond to that, I think certainly, I believe strongly that there are major O&M benefits, which maybe HART is not going to necessarily see, but I think we need to look at this holistically, together with the city. What's in the best benefit to this community? So I really believe we're going to see major O&M benefits. But the other thing I would suggest to you to consider is, if we put together under one entity the construction and the long-term O&M, are we going to get a proposal that suggests that we can build this thing 10 months faster, because then we get into operations that much faster and we start to repay our debt that much faster? I really believe that that is one of the benefits we're going to see, where if it's straight design build, is there as strong an incentive to finish in a timely manner? If we specify 63 months, I feel we'll get a proposal for 63 months. I'm not sure. I think there is some extra benefit, and we're hearing this from the companies themselves that say, yes, put it together. That's where you're going to get the bang for the buck. And in fact, some of them said, if you don't put it together, well, we have other deals around the world that we're more interested in, which gets into the limited competition concern that I have over design build. So that's just one thing to maybe consider as you review the information that we'll be giving you.
Yeah. So, I want to sort of reiterate a concern I had stated in an earlier meeting and sort of follow up with Wes's comments. And I think the question is whether the state law, Act 1, allows us to use the TAT and the GET revenues for payment of these affordability payments on that 2/3 portion of the capital costs. So that's a legal question that I think needs to be evaluated, which I've already shared with you, Andy. So I just wanted to reemphasize that. The other thing I would say as a general matter is, I'm a strong believer, rightly or wrongly, that the private sector can perform a lot of these types of functions that the governments historically have done better. And the reasons are because the private sector is driven by a competitive set of circumstances that forces them to be more efficient. And when you look at a project like the rail project, I agree with Professor Roth that, hey, we should have looked at this hard from the beginning. And if we did, and if the P3 environment was developed enough, like it was in Europe and other parts of the world, maybe we wouldn't be here today with a lot of the problems we're facing. But that's, you can't cry over spilt milk. We're here where we are today. So the question is, do we look at P3 today? Now, I personally have been pushing P3 as a board member since I joined the board, but I wasn't getting any traction. And the reasons I was not getting any traction is because everybody was telling me, and when I say everybody, I mean everybody on the HART staff that were involved in this, that could push that effort forward, said it's too late. We had to have done it in the beginning. And that's why I keep asking you, Andy, now that we're taking a hard look at it, how many serious, qualified companies are actually expressing a lot of interest? And what you're telling me is a lot. So that's very encouraging to me, because like Ember, I am a strong proponent of P3. I think if it can be done for the city center and the Port Highlands station, that or parking garage, that we should do it. You know, I just want to make sure that these parties that are saying they're going to take a hard look at it, because it's very expensive for them to prepare their proposals, you know, that they're really going to do it. And so, and it's going to cost us a lot of money to pursue it, right, to prepare the RFP and so on. I mean, I think the budget that we're hearing is like $10 million. So, you know, we just have to be very, we have to vet these people very carefully to make sure that they're dealing with us in good faith. They're not just, you know, floating balloons to see, you know, what works, what doesn't, and that we're not, you know, chasing our tail in this effort. Having said all that, you know, the other comment I wanted to make is that, you know, I'm not convinced that the private finance is necessarily more expensive than public finance, because the companies we're dealing with are huge. And so their cost of funds and their ability to borrow funds is in many cases lower than what certain governments can get. Now, you know, I'm not comparing it to the city and county of Honolulu and its bond capacity and so on. Who knows? But all I'm saying is that when you're dealing with companies like the Fluors and the Bechtels of the world, I mean, their ability to borrow funds at very low, you know, interest rates is there. So, compounded by the fact that the underwriting is going to be based on the city's ability to make those affordability payments. Well, obviously that borrowing is underwritten in large part by the creditworthiness of the city. So, you know, I think we'll see that if there's a spread between the finance costs from the private sector and the public sector, I think that spread's going to be relatively small, if any.
If I could just respond to a couple of your comments. First of all, on the advisory costs, I should have mentioned this, but when we come back to you on the P3, we'll also be coming to you for funding for the advisors, and what we're talking about mostly is a legal advisor, which you provided limited funding for at the last meeting, and then also the financial advisor. But now that we're focused on a shorter-term finance, we're revising downward our $10 million estimate, so we're looking to be in the $6 to $7 million range now. So that's good news, and we'll come back to you with more definitive information on that next time. On the competition issue, first of all, we have a two-step procurement process. So if we go forward next month, what we're talking about is step one RFP by the end of August. This is really the qualification stage where the proposers come forward with their teams, and we would aim to look at 3 finalists, at 3 priority listed offerers, or short list as it's called, at that stage. So we'll really start to get a sense of who's serious at that stage. And that's not an expensive proposal for them to develop at that stage. And then the second step, of course, is the more expensive stage where they actually develop their full proposal. As I mentioned earlier, we know of 4 teams that are forming. As a matter of fact, I had a call right before this meeting of a guy telling me he's going to a partner meeting. And when is that RFP coming out? So that was today. A couple of our local contractors here, both have been traveling to the mainland, talking to some of these entities. And I used to be on that side of the table in my former life, and I've been in these kind of meetings, and they're not shy about letting us, you know, telling us the truth. There's less sales and marketing associated with the way they communicate with us, simply because they're looking at a 30-year deal and $10 million or more to assemble proposals. So we get a lot of honesty right up front in terms of the viability of our project and the seriousness of their participation. And they've been keeping in touch with us all along the way. So I really believe that at least the 4 that I've heard about are very serious about coming here. And Terry, you've also made a point in the past to me, and I can tell you from my own personal experience that the deal making within these teams is pretty intense, and it's a bit different than the way it is between the public and the private sector. So, you know, at the beginning of P3 and DBFOM, if you will, the engineering firms out there and the system suppliers, you know, they weren't really in the business of making equity investments or taking a lot of, you know, putting a lot of skin in the game. They wanted to get paid for their services. But they realized that this was the way the industry was moving, so they had to get on board. But you know, what you find when you're inside the boardroom of these consortium is that they're pretty hard-nosed negotiations between sort of the developer box, the design-build box, and the O&M contractor box. The penalties are more severe, the liquidated damages are more severe for things like delay. Because of the presence of that private finance, you know, lenders want their money back when you say that you're ready to pay it back, and when the plan tells you that. So, you know, the risk within these consortiums is pretty intense and sorted out, and I think that benefits us greatly.
Any other? Yes, go ahead.
I have a couple comments. One is when we look at the risk for both DB and DBFOM, I think things beyond the contractor's control right away, and the utility relocation, primarily HECO. Okay, because in the past, we haven't met the targets. Okay, so what is the effect? We kind of know what the effect is on DB because we've been experiencing that. But when you look at a DBFOM creature, what is that cost impact if we delay the project because of these right-of-way issues or HECO relocation issues? Okay, so we need to, hopefully we're addressing those issues. How does this affect our FTA approval of our recovery plan?
Okay, so first of all, in the first statement, I've heard you, you know, voice that concern before, and actually that sort of precipitated the launching of the risk workshops. So we intend to address the issue. In a risk allocation, there are certain risks that stay with us. So right-of-way and utility relocation are two that will primarily stay with us in terms of the risk allocation. So we do have to deliver those that work. And if we're delayed, the concessionaire or the P3 partner would be entitled to what's called a relief event, and that would be part of the negotiation on the agreements with the P3 partner.
Right,
but we're trying to assess those risks and put cost to those risks.
With a DB,
yeah.
it's basically we're dealing with construction contractors' delays.
Yep.
With the DBFOM, there's probably a financial component that we have to deal with also, in addition to his contractor.
Right. As well as the commencement of operations and maintenance, right? Yeah, understand. And we hope to assess that risk and put some numbers to that.
Okay. And then what about the timetable for FTA?
FTA. So we've spoken to the FTA, and what they've said to us is project delivery methodology is a local issue. So they're waiting on us to determine how we're going to carry out City Center and Pearl Highlands. And then we will review that with them. In terms of the recovery plan, I don't really see that much effect on the recovery plan. If anything, the risk will be somewhat mitigated in the recovery plan. We may have to append the recovery plan to discuss in more detail what delivery method we're using for City Center. I should note that in the last 4 weeks or so, FTA has put out, or USDOT has put out guidance on public-private partnerships, and they want to make sure that there are no impediments to the participation by the private sector. This is involved in the rulemaking that they're putting out for comment right now. They want to encourage public-private partnerships, make sure there are no impediments in a local process. So we believe that, you know, this initiative that we have is very much in line with the thinking of USDOT and the FDA.
I guess my final comment is, and this is a work in progress, I understand, and that is, we as a board, and Andy, you as our CEO, have been pushing this notion of a P3, and that's why you brought in Ernst & Young to give us advice as to whether it makes any sense, given where we are in this construction project, whether there would be any interest, and to their credit, they answered those two parts of the questions, that yes, there is interest, and yes, it can make sense to do it at this stage in our project. But now we're struggling with, should we do it? And part of the should we do it came from the Ernst & Young's analysis that the only interest in a P3 is going to be if there's an O&M component to it. Otherwise, don't even bother. I mean, I think that's what the message was. So we're going down this path now with a DBFOM, and I am, to put it mildly, extremely concerned that because HART and this board doesn't control the O&M portion of it, and that the city has not provided sufficient resources to analyze, no disrespect to my colleague here, has not provided the sufficient resources or, work to analyze the O&M component of it, that HART is driving this in order to put together an RFP. They're driving a DBFOM component, and that I just hope that we're not set up for failure because of our inability to get our hands around, we collectively, HART City, around the O&M component in order to make this work, because we're running out of time, and with the trade wars, steel costs, tariffs, all of these things, to me that only translates to more expense in construction, and I'm just really worried about this.
Yeah, we have a hard deadline coming up to proceed with City Center, so we're very conscious of that. I would say on the O&M side that, part of our Kuleana is to prepare for operations and maintenance, even though we're not responsible for doing O&M. So as part of that preparation, we are very engaged now, working particularly with DTS and BFS in benchmarking O&M costs. And I think this, even if we do not proceed with P3, I think this is going to be a great benefit that we are focused on that right now. So it's not a wasted effort. We're looking at 30-year costs for O&M right now. We're gathering information from places like Vancouver, who have a 30-year track record of operating and maintaining a system very similar to this one. We're looking at the former bids, three former bids that we had, just to help us benchmark the O&M costs, because we had fixed price bids from 3 entities back in 2010. So we have people on our side that are familiar with O&M, and we're working closely with city departments to benchmark those costs so that whether we go P3 or not, this is a very important exercise to
But it isn't just the cost. It's, from the city's perspective, it's got to be the model. What model will they use to do O&M? In-house, third-party contractor like OTS and the bus system, Ansaldo plus something else, because O&M isn't just Ansaldo, as we know from the Ernst & Young study. That was my eye-opener. It's more than just what Ansaldo's going to do. And I don't think any of those things have been decided by the city, so we're forcing them to look at the model that they're going to use for O&M, not just the costs. The costs are going to be the costs, just like the bus costs are the costs. The handy van costs are the costs. And so, anyway, that's my...
Board member Shin, I wasn't going to say anything, but since you poked me a little...
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to poke you. It's not a poke at you.
Well, I thought I'd share with my fellow board members a little bit of a status report, because we are getting the resources together. And since several people said how they like the idea of a P3, keep in mind that the city has a number of P3s. Some of those are under DTS. So whether it's our parking facilities where we're using concession agreements, whether it's the bike sharing program, where there's a heavy city involvement, whether it's some new forms of P3s like the Waikiki Transportation Management Association, or what you just mentioned, the bus. Keep in mind that's a private contractor. So we're very familiar with the O&M aspects of P3s, which is my big concern. And I have done some research. First of all, let me talk to the resource part of this, because in this current budget cycle, we did go to the administration and to the council, and in the current budget are 10 additional positions that have been approved for DTS. 3 of them are going to be purely 100% dedicated positions to rail O&M. One of them is going to be utility consumption specialist, another one's going to be an account-based revenue specialist. So all these positions will have something to do with rail. A couple of them are going to have something to do with parking, because that's one of the places we're going to get revenue from to pay for the O&M. So all of this thinking and all of this is moving forward and is in coordination with the city council. So we will also be asking for additional positions next year. I think I might have mentioned this before, but we do have a memorandum of understanding with Andy and HART to have those people also located here. So those people that will be responsible for the Unsaldo contract will be sitting next to the people that are already dealing with the Unsaldo contract. So we're proceeding upon a critical path that matches up with either a design, build, or a design, build, operate, finance, operate, maintain approach. I think that's all in order. I also want you to know that last week I was at the After Rail Conference. I took the opportunity, and some of you know this gentleman, to speak to Henry Stoppelkamp. He's the Assistant General Manager with the Denver RTD. He's the equivalent of the person that actually is on the owner's side of things to oversee the P3 contractor on the Eagle Line. So one of the things that I have been doing is corresponding back and forth with Henry, and I met with him extensively during the conference. And so I have a different set of concerns, because the one word that's not being used very much in this conversation is some of the things you were bringing up. Who is the owner going to be ultimately? Well, the owner is purely the city. And the city's going to be responsible for these availability payments. And the city's going to be responsible for this huge contract. And we're already doing that with these other situations I've mentioned previously. All these are governed by a contract. And I'm constantly having, Randall, you awake over there? I'm constantly, I'm constantly having to go to CORE, because we have to get something done where the contract becomes an obstacle. And lo and behold, that's the same thing Henry was telling me, is that everything can't be predicted. There are things that change, and you have to anticipate as much of that change as you can, but you can't anticipate all the changes. And every time that they have to negotiate a change order or an additional cost, there's an automatic 54% markup. So for a $100,000 item, it costs Denver RTD $154,000. So he's just pointing out these things to be aware of. I have a lot more to say about our conversations, but let me also say that I talked to Mike Richard. He's the equivalent person in Vancouver, British Columbia. And basically he said, you know, on the Canada line, we entered into a 30-year P3 contract. Then there was the Evergreen line, which we wanted to be light rail. But when the federal government gave us our money, they said, no, we really like SkyTrain, and we really like P3s. So they had to negotiate back and forth, and ultimately, it was a 7-year term, not a 30-year term, that they embarked upon. So at our future meetings, and I'm still doing my fact-finding and trying to figure out exactly what the best position is for the city in all this, but in our future conversations, I'm going to be talking about the role of the owner, and after the contract's executed, and after this project is built, what are our successors going to inherit, and what kind of position are we going to be putting them in? I just want to mention one other thing, because I think this is kind of important. A lot has been said about the EY report, and I'm a little concerned that there wasn't enough fact-checking done, because the whole premise was, on page 14, I think it is, here's 5 example projects, and they all saved over 10%. So one of the first things I did is send Henry that report. And I said, I want to hear from you about how you saved the 12% because you went with a P3. He said, we didn't save anything because of a P3. We rescoped the project. So and some of you may remember when you were there a year ago, they have single-track structures. Originally, there were double-track structures. So the cost differences were for things of that nature where it was a de-scoping of the project. And he said, based upon our past experience of actually operating this system, they have decided not to go with the rest of the P3. So EAGLE stands for East and Gold Line Enterprise. And so the East Line is from downtown to the airport. I'm trying to remember here. Who all rode that line? The airport, yeah. Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure everybody knows who was with me back then. The Eagle was not that line alone, which is about 20 some odd miles. It was the whole other side going out to Arvada. They've decided not to go ahead with the Denver partnership. They're going to go ahead and do that internally as a standard design build, and they're going to operate and maintain it themselves. So I think it's important for this group to put yourself in the position of the city 10 years out, 20 years out, and make sure that we're doing the right thing. But we are getting the resources together, board member Shin. We are doing our homework as best we can. And we are gathering some information, so I hope useful.
We're good? Okay. Moving on, before we get to the next subject, I'm opening it up for anybody willing to testify on behalf of this. Again, and I have some testifiers already that signed up. Smel Kaheli.
Again, I want to reserve my testimony after the other testifying.
Okay. Jeff Masasugo.
Good morning, Chair and members. My name is Jeff Masasugo. I'm here this morning on behalf of 4 organizations: the Painters Labor Management Cooperation Fund, the Tapers Market Recovery Fund, the Glazer Stabilization Fund, and the Carpet and Soft Tile Layers Market Recovery Fund. Thank you, Chair, for this opportunity to testify on this matter. I'm here to testify on the construction aspect of the P3, and we'd just like to request that HART consider using a PLA if a P3 is going to be authorized. And this would be with respect to construction, new construction, as well as repair, renovations, and maintenance. And the reason we support the use of a project labor agreement is to increase or to create a level playing field for unionized contractors on the project. So again, we ask that in completing the study, HART consider seriously a project labor agreement. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to try and answer them.
Thank you, Jeff. If I'm not mistaken, Andy brought this up to their attention, and whether DB, DBE, FOM, it'll come under the RSTA or RTSTA, RTSA, PLA. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, there would be no change.
Be no change, correct. Anyone else wishing to testify? Go ahead.
In my opinion, the reason why P3s are getting renewed attention, I mentioned earlier that they were discussed as something that was a desirable thing 12 years ago and nothing happened at that point, is I think it's becoming increasingly clear that this project is in real trouble. The critics, and I'm one of them, we thought that you would stay on budget until Middle Street. Panos Prevederos, Cliff Slater, Ben Cayetano, you named the critic. We were saying that the cost overruns would come once you got to Middle Street. And here we've gone from whatever you want to say the starting number is to something well north of $8.165 million. Among other things, that doesn't include financing costs. And obviously, that's the cost of this project. And there are other reasons why that number is, at best, suspect. You've got Kiewit that's in the business of building what you need built, that has the advantage, one would think, of having worked with your predecessors, having been here, understanding what is up ahead, this fourth segment. They're not even bidding. This is reason for alarm. The utilities relocation, which 7 months ago in the newspaper was described as a $200 million project. Now it's described as a maximum of $400 million. Well, it's not a maximum, right? Nobody's guaranteeing that for no more than $400 million we're going to complete this project. So in addition to misleading the public, in my opinion, as to what we're looking at there, we're clearly going to be well above budget if you plow forward. My background is as a CPA, and I admire your restraint in using words like I'm skeptical or I'm not convinced. This discussion of P3 right now is making the numbers aren't beginning to add up. Let's give the private sector a whole lot of risk so that they can give us a bunch of money, save us money. It makes no sense whatsoever. What would make sense would be for you to focus on this is a sinking ship of sorts that made it where it is, will make it to Middle Street. But if you set sail again, if you plow past Middle Street, you're going to find yourself in a position where there simply isn't enough money in the world to keep it going. There's an old story about the farmer in Kansas. What are you going to do if you lose the farm? What would you do if you had all the money in the world? Right?
Okay, time is running out on your 2 minutes.
Farming, until the money ran out. My point is, I really would encourage you to focus on the danger of setting sail beyond Middle Street. I was involved in something some of you were also involved in, sometimes called the broken trust thing. What amazed me about that was a number of people that after it was all over looked back and said, how in the world could something like that go on so long without people standing up like Gladys Brent, Sam King, and Walter Heen, and Monsignor K. Camano eventually did.
Okay,
said,
Mr.
no,
Roth,
this
we're
can't
going to have to
continue.
cut this already, okay?
So I would encourage
Thank you.
to say this can't continue. We've got to take a hard, honest look at where we are right now, and I think anything other than stopping at Middle Street is
Okay, thank you.
proved to be a disaster.
Mr.
Thank you
Kelly.
very much.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair, members of the board. For the record, my name is Joseph O'Donnell. Excuse me, Joseph O'Donnell, and I represent the members of the Ironworkers Union Local 625. Steel is for real. So the Honolulu Authority for Rapid Transit announced earlier this year that it would be pursuing a public-private partnership for the city center segment or the remaining 4 miles of elevated guideway and 8 stations, as well as the remainder of the Pearl Highlands facility. The Ironworkers Union strongly support these efforts based on the following benefits to the city and the taxpayers. P3 structure would prove to be a better way to conduct business for rail by using private funds for a public project. P3 can maintain and improve partnerships with Hawaii's local construction community through existing project labor agreements, which will remain in full effect. This is important to the construction industry. A P3 would reduce the city's financial exposure to benefit Honolulu's taxpayers in completing the rail project. The city could increase certainty in capital, operating, and maintenance costs, providing advantages for future city budgets to the taxpayers and the property taxpayers who fund those budgets. Private sector is better able to manage some of the risks that HART and the city now have to manage. A P3 approach can bring in new opportunities through the introduction of innovative construction delivery methods. I'd like to commend the board and HART for initiating this study. Perhaps we're 5 years too late, as everybody knows, but that's yesterday, and today is today. For the ironworkers, what this project has meant is, on the first 10-mile segment, we have doubled our monthly man hours. But more importantly, we have been able to bring in over 100 local young men and women into our trade. The majority of those workers are now journeymen, qualified journeymen, and as Mr. Robbins stated, the report from STG They're moving along very nicely, and they're under budget. One of the contributing factors, along with the ironworkers, with the other basic crafts that have been involved in the building of the first 10 miles, is the qualifications. Although this next segment is the design is just a little bit different, it's still the basic fundamentals. You put the steel into the cast, you put in the rods, you put in the post tension, you pour the cement, you strip the form, you store it, then you do the vertical construction. As you can see, when you go by the airport and down by Pearl Harbor, those columns are starting to pop up quite frequently. I believe the schedule is at least one per week. Okay, that is the bulk of the work in the rail, because there's foundations to be made, there's drilling to be done, drill shafts to be filled. Once we get to the vertical construction, you will see that portion of the rail really take off. And I do sincerely believe that the rail, this segment of the rail, will come in before time and under budget. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone may have, and I thank you guys for the opportunity to speak in strong support.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Anybody else wishing to testify?
Finally. Chair Kim, Vice Chair Lee, I appreciate you allowing me to say a few words today, but you know what Mr. O'Donnell just testified, and again, my name is Mel Kahili. I work for the Ironworkers Stabilization Fund, and I just wanted to make a statement in strong support of what Mr. Joe O'Donnell just stated. You know, I hear all good news, you know, accountability, efficiency, cost containment, the sustainability of the O&M. We're going to be completed on time. Lesser or maybe no change orders. You know, we've been attending these meetings for many years. We've attended a lot of hearings at the state capitol, pushing for the rail project. I remember in 1993 when rail first was brought up, and it failed. We got this thing going. I live in Kapolei. Not only numbers are going up in population, but numbers are going up in time for me to get to Kapolei, to Honolulu. So, you know, we talk about numbers. You know, we need to look at what we're facing as residents of the Leeward Coast, in the Leeward area. More housing, Hope is coming up with close to 13,000 units or homes. Coral Ridge is coming up with several thousand more homes. Where's it gonna leave me? Where's it gonna leave my family? Where's it gonna leave my community? Where's it gonna leave the Leeward area? Stuck in traffic for several hours just to get here. You know, I know some of you, maybe none of you, may not live on our side, but I've been there 44 years. I was one of the first people to move to Makakilo. I've seen the changes. So, you know, it's good news to hear that, you know, we got the 3P idea floating around, and hopefully we can get it done. And I believe that's one of the reasons why Mr. Robbins was brought in, being paid the big bucks, right? And that's the reason why all of you are board members. Great questions was asked. And, you know, we need to look at trying to fix this problem and get it real completed. There was a letter sent to Mr. Kim, I believe in May. I was surprised by one of our board members, you know, asking to stop at Middle Street again. And I'm not going to mention any names. But, you know, if we want to continue to have public trust, we don't need board members sending letters to the chair asking, hey, you know, let's look at transparency. I believe there is transparency here. These people that's asking about transparency, come to the meetings. They can hear and see what you guys are doing. So, with that being said, I'm not going to talk anything negative about the person, but, you know, we don't want to stop in Middle Street. We want to go all the way to Ala Moana. Thank you.
Thank you. Wait, Ms. Iwase.
Natalie Wassa for the record. I want to express concerns similar to what Professor Roth did, and I do ask you to stop at Middle Street. I know this board has said that your mission is to go all the way to Ala Moana, but you have a fiduciary responsibility to
The
everybody.
testifying for this is on P3, yes, so I just
yes.
want to remind everybody that we
Yes.
stick on topic, please.
Yes. So what I wanted to mention was that back in the end of August, there was a special budget meeting at City Council. I believe this was just prior to the passage of Act 1. And the mayor at that time was talking about the city center guideway and stations contract and how that would move forward, and P3 was being discussed. And as I recall, he said that in order for P3 to even make sense with respect to that contract, there would have to be over a $200 million savings. So I'm sorry, I don't have the exact date, I don't have that exact amount, but I will send that to you so that you can make a good decision and evaluate what he said at that time and what you're hearing now. And I especially appreciate the comment from Wes regarding the Ernst & Young savings that they had included that it apparently was not really a true savings. So I think this is really important for you to have this information and review it before you make a final decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead, Peter.
Aloha, Chair Kim, Vice Chair Lee, and members of the HART Board. My name is Peter Lee with Hawaii Lesset. Hawaii Lesset is the labor management partnership between the Laborers Union Local 368 and the unionized contractors. I believe you have my testimony. I'm not sure, but I sent it in late. My apologies. Hawaii Lesset has been a long supporter of rail, and we commend this body for even bringing this discussion up and looking into P3 as an option to possibly reduce the city's financial exposure. And it's actually its goal to complete the rail all the way to Ala Moana Shopping Center. So thank you very much. Hawaii Lesset also supports Hawaii's local construction industry, and we urge you that this body also reaffirm that the PLA still do exist, which you folks just did that a few minutes ago. So thank you very much on that end as well. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, thank you. Any more testifiers? If not, in addition to those that testified here today, I also have two other letters. One is from the Hawaii Operating Engineers Industry Stabilization Fund, submitted in support of the P3 with comments. The last one that I have is from former Mayor Mufi Hanneman, which Mr. Roth brought up earlier in regards to going and supporting the P3 line as well and looking to it. So I appreciate everybody supporting that. Before we move on again, I just want to thank everybody that came out to testify in regards to P3. Today is not a day that we are voting on it. We just wanted to field comments and questions so that Mr. Andy Robbins can give him an idea of how to put everything together to present to the board at next month's meeting in whether we should move ahead with P3 or not. So this is something that, like previously stated, Mr. Robbins did put on his resume, and one of the reasons that we did hire him was because he had some expertise in looking to P3s and how to save us some money. So we'll see about that. Thank you again. So moving back, I know there's some board members that may have to leave earlier. We're going to move back to item number 3, approval of the minutes of the May 14, 2018 meeting and Board of Directors. Okay, quickly.
Chairman?
So yes.
I have a change to page 6 on my comment. Seems like the first sentence on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the sixth paragraph. It's not a complete sentence.
What?
It says Board Member Wesley Machida for clarification on the footnote.
Wait,
Maybe
what
put
page?
past.
What page is that?
Page 6.
Page 6. Sorry. No, 6.
Maybe she says something like, Board Member Wesley Machida asked for clarification on footnote on page 11 as to whether the GET and TET would be available.
Okay.
It's just missing a word.
Yeah.
Okay. So noted. Thank you. Is there anybody else with any other
Yeah,
corrections?
there's a couple small ones, Chair. Page 3, fourth paragraph, the third line, it says the affordability of P3 is, would be, I think is probably not necessary. And then there was another one, page 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth paragraph, I think third line, the word financier is not spelled correctly.
You, I?
Yep.
Okay.
But other than that, I thought they were really well written. Good job.
Toby's a frustrated lawyer.
Your spell check is not working. Okay. Is there any other corrections? If not, can I get a motion to accept the minutes as with corrections?
So moved.
Second. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carried. Item number 5, Resolution 2018-4, adopting operation and capital budget for fiscal year 2019. Mike McGreen and Darren? No, Mike? Okay.
Good morning. I'm Mike McGrane. I'm in your finance department. I'm joined with Darian Moriucci, and we'll go over the item before you. Resolution 2018-4 is seeking adoption of the fiscal year 2019 operating and capital budgets. And just stepping back and reviewing the process, the process starts in September, October, where staff puts together the budget, discussions by the board in October, November timeframes. You adopted allowing the transmittal to the city by December 1st, an operating and capital budget. That goes over to the city, and the city council reviewed it, reviewed our budget, and made a decision on June 6th this month. And now it's coming to you for final adoption. Let me go over attachment 1 of your reso is the operating budget. Let me go over what changed over that time period. So the original transmittal that you sent over to council, the operating budget was about $24.7 million. And then in March of 2018, the CEO came to you with his vision of restructuring the organization. That saved the operating budget of around $700,000. So that decreased the budget from that $24.7 million. And then in April, we worked with especially the board chairs of the audit committee and the budget committee, finance committee, to look at capitalization policy, which more aligns us with accounting standards. That shifted more money to the capital budget, and we'll get into that in a second. And then through the council hearings and all that, the operating budget now is made up of 2 portions. One's $7.6 million, and that's salary, benefits, and other costs such as rent. And it also includes $30.8 million for debt service. So now the entire operating budget totals $38,426,047. So those were the changes from your initial transmittal to the city till now. Let me talk a little bit now of the changes in the capital budget. As you may recall in what's gone over this morning, that we're approaching the final aspects of the project. So in the original capital budget, you have City Center Guideways and Station project. This is attachment 2 of the resolution. You also had, in the original, the Pearl Highlands parking garage, and you had a contingency amount to address all the contracts in place at the time. Those three items are about 85% of your capital budget. The changes to that came with, one, the capitalization policy that I talked about in the operating budget. So $17 million came over to the capital budget as a result of the county capitalization policy. In addition, you'll see $44 million in the capital budget now. That's the portion that's coming from the city. City Council adopted, put into our capital budget $44 million to address FTA concerns. So with that, the new capital budget went from $1,743,000,000 to $1,773,000,000. And with that, I'll stop right there and address any questions you may have.
Okay. Board members, any questions?
I have a quick question.
Yes, go ahead.
You separated the OPEB from the fringe benefits on the schedule that you have here attached to your resolution.
Uh-huh.
How do you calculate the fringe benefit costs? Wasn't it based on a percentage of what's provided for by the state or the city in terms of a fringe benefit assessment?
Yeah, with regard to OPEB or benefits
With regard
in
to the
general?
fringe benefit, because OPEB, the fringe benefit charge should also, the percentage should also include the OPEB as well too, as a part of the percentage charge.
Yeah, so what we get from the actuaries, you know, is we're in the final year of the, you know, it goes from 20% of the normal cost to 40 to 60 to 80 to 100.
Right.
So this gets us up to the 100% of what we're expected to pay in the normal cost in a year.
Right, the escalation. But then the fringe benefit assessment should include the escalation as well too, so.
Right.
So are you double counting then, or is it?
No, I think that this is the total payment that we have to make into the OPEB. Now, the city can do additional amounts in that to reduce that, but the portion to HART is coming from the actuary, and that's what's in the budget.
Okay. Thank you. Just want to make sure that it's not double counted, that's all.
Right.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, on the table is voting for the adoption of our operating and capital budgets for the fiscal year 2019, ending June 30th, 2019.
So moved.
Okay, there's a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion is carried. Okay, go right ahead. Sorry.
Natalie Wassa for the record. I did have that on my testify list. Anyway, just a couple points. First of all, I think it's really important for everybody to understand that from an overall perspective, the net increase given to rail is $13 million. With respect to the city center guideway and stations, the FTA has been clear that they recommend the peer review, and still today we haven't heard anything from HART regarding when that is going to happen, although they're going to continue to push forward with getting this last contract in place. So I'm very concerned about that. And then the last thing is this allocation of the personnel, $17 million. In the past, you know, we've had nice detail on the operating budget between the salaries, the benefits, and that kind of expense. But now that it's in the capital improvement budget, it appears to have been added to the project contingency line item, and we've lost all that detail. So I ask going forward that that detail be provided in a separate schedule somewhere so we can evaluate it. I think that just makes sense from an accounting perspective and management decision basis as well. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to item number 6, Resolution 2018-5 relating to Honolulu Authority of Rapid Transportation request to the Honolulu City Council for approval of the insurance and sale of general obligation bonds totaling $44 million.
Yes, according to the charter, when we have no authority to issue bonds, HART, so we petition the city to authorize and issue bonds to meet our cash flow needs. Resolution 2018-5 is a little bit different this year. It's in two parts, both 2018.5 and 2018.6. 2018.5 represents $44 million, and that's the amount that the city council put in to address FTA concerns. This is separated because this is the city's issuance, and all interest costs will be borne, and any other debt service costs are being borne by the city. So in this issue, we're still seeking $44 million, but it'll be from the city. Let me speak a little bit to 2018-6 as well, because they sort of go hand in glove. In this one, we're asking for up to $450 million, which represents our usual amount based on our cash flow that we'll need for 2019. If that, we're asking for authority up to $450 million. Should the 44 pass, City Council, our request would be reduced by that amount. And with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Okay. Board members, any questions regarding to both resolutions 5 and 6? Okay, seeing none. Is there anybody wishing to testify in regards to BF before we take a vote? Okay. Thank you. Motion to accept, so we'll take separately, but the two items. So first is Resolution 2018-5, motion to accept the asking of the $44 million GEO bonds. So moved. Okay, there's a second.
Second.
All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carried. Item number 7, which was the Resolution 2018-6, regarding the $450 million. In the motion?
So moved.
Motion, do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, okay, motion is carried. Moving on to item number 8, change order West Section Construction Engineering and Inspection Consultant requests. Frank.
Good morning, Board Chair and Board members. I'm Frank Kosick. I'm the Director of Design and Construction for HART, and the purpose of this briefing is to seek Board approval with respect to Contract Amendment 3 for the West Section Construction Engineering Consultant. Amendments required to ensure continuity of construction management services on the West Section contracts through the remainder of the contract period. And if approved, this amendment will increase the contract sum by $20 million. It's important to note that the funds are budgeted. What I mean by that is they're in the current budget. They're not contingency allocated or unallocated. They're a part of the contract line item for this construction engineering consultancy. A little bit of background, but before I go into background, I would like the board to know that the HART staff did get together and examine a variety of options before reaching the conclusion that requesting this amendment approval was in the best interests of HART, concluding these having construction management services on the west side continue through the end of the contract. We looked at reprocurement. We looked at perhaps moving to one construction and engineering and inspection and engineering consultant for the entirety of the alignment. Considered a briefer period of time, which was considered last year and which was briefed to the board, and I'll cover that in the background. And so we went through some course of action development, advantages and disadvantages, had a healthy debate, and the conclusion we drew was that this was the best way to proceed for the interest of the project. So as mentioned, Long was awarded the CEI contract for $54 million. The scope covers the CEI services in the West. Last year, at the June 2017 board meeting, HART staff did request an increase of $16 million to cover the CE&I performance of the scope of work through the fiscal year that we were just finishing up. It was noted at that time as well that in requesting approval from the board that HART staff would be requesting a follow-on amendment to complete the contract. So in essence, this is Amendment 3. Amendment 2 was for FY18. Amendment 1 pretty much had to do with some administrative actions, key personnel acceptance, etc. So this is really a follow-on to that last year's discussion. A little bit, just to draw back on some of the things that were discussed from last year with respect to this contract. The initial contract did envision sequential versus overlapping contracts, and there were some delays associated with interfaces with other systems designs coming on board and access. But if you look at this slide here, the slide talks to the current contracts versus the budgeted contracts that were in the initial budget. And so I mentioned the fact that sequential versus overlapping. We took the stations contract that was a 9 stations contract and split it into 3 contracts at the time. And there were various reasons for that, but the bottom line is that we couldn't take advantage of the economies under the 1 contract when we split it into 3. You can also see that there's additional contracts that are currently being overseen by the West CE&I. So the amendment summary, the total construction and contract value they're overseeing is 1.8, and so the 20 million, which would be the amendment in addition, gets us to an estimate that compares favorably with the industry standard for these kinds of services. And the projects are shown are the projects that we're looking at concluding during this period. There are others. There's a few other contracts that I had mentioned that were in the closeout stages. One is MSF, one is H2R2. We're literally processing the books for final signatures. So the cost impact of the change order, as shown, total contract value is $90.2 million. Represents not to exceed amount. It's based on review of invoices and approval for personnel in place providing services. Recommendation is that the HART Board approve this contract amendment so that we can continue to sustain our construction management services on the west side through the completion of the contracts. Okay. Subject to your questions.
Okay, board members, anybody with questions? If not, anybody, oh yes, right, Jake.
No, he mentioned about experiencing delays and also about the possibility of doing re-procurement. I mean, are you satisfied with the work of the current?
Am I satisfied with the work of the current CE&I?
Yeah.
We satisfied. I would say I'm not satisfied. We've addressed and had them in their senior management to address some concerns that we raised with respect to their oversight. They've been responsive, and I believe I'm seeing improvement. But I wouldn't go to the point where I would say I'm satisfied at this point in time. There's room for improvement. One of the things that they're looking to do is provide some additional leadership out here on the ground. We had an opportunity to interview the person 2-3 weeks ago, experienced transit construction management professional, and I think he's got the right skill set to get us home. And to partner with the HART leadership that's overseeing this. So in short, I think we're making progress.
Any other questions? Yes, go
One
ahead.
question. Going from the 5 contracts to 9, when did that occur?
It was before my time, and so I don't know that I can give you specifics. I could certainly come back to the board.
I want to say it's about 3-4 years ago, somewhere about there.
So when the first change order occurred, the 16 million increase, the 9 contracts were already in place at the time.
So that's correct. That's correct. The amendment too. And one of the questions I was asked in doing pre-briefs for this was, at that time, could we have done, executed the amendment for the entire amount through the end? And the answer is yes. And I don't have the specifics. It's possible that the team at the time wanted to continue to evaluate and maybe not tie themselves into a specific a solution all the way through. That's quite possible.
Thank
That-
you.
Oh, you're welcome, sir.
Frank, one of the reasons cited for the change order was current construction contracts have experienced delays through 2019, resulting in a need for extended CE&I services. Why, can you explain what that means? What
Right.
is it about delays that increase their, because they're not necessarily doing more work, they're just being extended over a longer period of time, but they're looking at the same stuff, right? They're reviewing the same 9 particular contracts, and please help me with that.
Sure. I think part of it is the fact that we've had challenges with regard to the interface between the different contracts and the delivery model that we used, where it's apparent that maybe we didn't do the best job that we could with respect to the interface, say, between the fixed facilities contractors, the core systems contract, the interface with the fare gates and the escalators and elevators. Generated quite a bit. In hindsight, I'm looking at whether, in fact, in not knowing all the factors, it's hard to maybe determine, and it's hard to walk a mile in people's shoes when they were making decisions, but we may have went out a little bit too early with respect to the issue for construction contracts, and there were interface issues as a result of doing that, and consequences that were identified, by the way, through our risk management process, and I think we realized the costs associated with those risks. So that generated a lot of RFIs, requests for information. It generated quite a bit of exchange and back and forth between the engineer of record and the designer of record. That all takes time. I think those were the predominance of the delays. There were some delays associated with access as well, as the Guyways contractor was concluding their work and getting on to certain sites as well. Does that answer your question?
Well, the last part of your explanation, the delays, access delays. So what about not having access increases someone's cost? They just can't perform the work that they need to at that particular time. They have to wait, right, until they get
Just
access.
extends the contract period for the fixed facility contractor, and as a result, if we're going to have people oversee their work, then they'll be there longer. And so we did and continue to have conversations with the CE&I consultant with regard to their staffing plan and whether it's appropriate. You know, whether there's some efficiencies that they could take advantage of based on the delays. You know, they can share assets, et cetera. Do we need all these folks? I mean, those things certainly have to be looked at and continue to be looked at. And frankly, I'm looking to leverage them. We did see some, for example, the Amendment 2 for $16 million was for FY18. We actually, we still have funds left as such that I think we would be good, which is why I'm coming to the board now for another month or two. So we did a month, I would say a couple months better in terms of our estimate for the use of funds. And I think we can improve on that and close out. But I mean, really what's key to it is we've got to close out the West Side projects on time. I don't want to come back to you for more money.
No, I guess in my world, if we don't do work, we don't get paid. And we only get paid when we do work. So I'm having a hard time trying to understand how you have to pay somebody if they're not doing work.
So if I'm overseeing a contractor who has a schedule that says it takes me a month to do something, and I'm overseeing him, and it takes him 6 weeks, I'm still overseeing him. I'm still working through issues to get it done. So, I mean, that's really the point.
Okay.
Go ahead, Wes. Thanks, Chair. So have you been able to quantify what benefits this firm has done in overseeing the 9 contracts? In other words, we're increasing the scope of their contract, but have they provided benefits in overseeing the other 9 contracts? And if so, about how much? Have you been able to quantify that?
Well, if you recall, I came to the board in the beginning of the year and requested a change to the organization that would provide them a little bit more responsibility in overseeing the contract. At the time I met the contracts, at the time I had mentioned that the HART staff had a project manager that sat right over the top of their resident engineer, and we had kind of disenfranchised their construction manager. And so the organizational chart change to basically put more onus on the contract, on the CE&I consultant for the delivery of these projects. As far as answering your question with respect to tangible benefits, I think the benefits are associated with whether we're on schedule, we're on budget, we're improving our ability to manage change. I've seen some improvement. We've had some leadership challenges and some challenges in terms of filling personnel, but they've been responsive. We've had several conversations with their off-island management. We've seen them spend more time here on island to work with their team and ours to address issues or concerns we've had. So that's probably the best I can do in terms of response to your question for right now. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. We got to deliver the project. They're overseeing the construction management of the project. Expectation is it's within schedule, and it's to the quality that we want, and they're raising issues when they can't resolve them. And so to that extent, I believe they're performing.
Yeah, so Frank, with this change, takes us to about 90 million, which is our budget. So we don't have any more room with this.
I have
item.
contingency, but I don't want to use it.
Right. I mean, other than
I don't think I'll have to
contingency,
either.
right.
And to your point, I'm sorry, Glenn, before you ask your question, I think there are some projects that we have remaining that I've got to, in particular, 138 kV, which was never part of this CE&I's remit.
Okay.
And I am pursuing, I think I have that covered in my utilities budget.
Right.
So I'm still,
Okay,
I believe
that wasn't my question, though.
Oh, sorry.
Because you answered me that offline. Well, we have 21 months left on this contract. Takes us to January 2020. Okay, current burn rate for this contractor is about 1.6 million a month. Okay, we're giving them 20. So basically, for about we need to bring them down from 1.5 to about $1 million a month. So we need to monitor this, or else we're going to be here a year and a half from now having this discussion. Because this is basically, to answer your question, it's kind of like a time and material contract. We're paying for this staff on an hourly basis.
Even if they're not doing anything.
Right, because they're hired to monitor a contractor. Right. As long as the contract's going on, whether it's change orders some of it is the system, right? How fast do we respond to their recommendation? And do we accept their recommendation, or do we ask them to redo it? Anytime we ask a consultant to do something, you can expect a bill. So we need to manage that we bring them down to about $1 million a month.
Absolutely. I mean, I understand what you're saying with respect to the burn rate straight line, but the expectation is that we don't manage this straight line. We should start seeing the closeout of fixed facility contracts at the end of next spring. It's not my expectation that we would keep the station group on board once that happens. What I would expect is, and what I'm looking for in the CEI to have, is a staffing plan that says, once I'm substantially complete with a station group, then you tell me how you're going to minimally staff that entity for closeout. I don't need 8 people to do that, maybe 2. Maybe it's change management and an office manager to pull some things together. And so we are looking at that, and my expectation and guidance or direction, if you will, to the CE&I contract was manage to the contract amount, and take a hard look at your staffing plan with respect to closing out these contracts and downsizing your staff to our satisfaction.
I'd like to add something. Back in January, we made a change in our organization. It appeared that what we had was a situation where we had the consultant, as you mentioned, being directed by HART staff, and that didn't make any sense to me. So what we did is we streamlined some of our staff. We made the so-called consultant really an extension of HART. this is the way that construction management really operates in other places and what I was familiar with on other projects. So we wanted to empower our construction manager to make decisions and to be very responsive in the field to problems that come up on a daily basis. So we made that change, and you heard earlier that we took about $700,000 out of the budget in the process of doing that. And at the same time, we empowered our CE&I contractors as extension of staff to be part of HART. They don't need to be directed by HART. They are HART. So I think we improved the efficiency there. I think it's really not appropriate to say that they're not doing anything, and I don't think you really meant that, but I can tell you firsthand that the CE&I consultant in this case spent many hours optimizing their staff. We had a lot of changes, we had a lot of delays, and they spent many hours changing their staffing to optimize it to make sure that there was no inefficiencies and try to, because you can't just mobilize and demobilize, especially when you have people that are from the mainland, experts that are here. They can't just fly back and forth, you know, and use them part-time. So it's really a puzzle to optimize it. And I believe that our contractor in this case spent a lot of time making sure that that was efficient as possible. So I just really want to clarify
I didn't mean to say that they weren't working. I mean, because we had a lot of issues. We had a lot of issues on the west side.
Yeah, and if we have a problem with one or two individuals, it's the same as if I have a problem with any of our staff. We evaluate that and we make changes as we have to. And that's where this particular contractor has been responsive and has made some of those changes that we felt necessary.
So I think the point is making sure the burn rate is managed. And I think by the new reporting that we have in the monthly reports, this is one of the contracts that we're
One other thing we do, Director, is in our weekly leadership meetings, we now are going through dashboards of each of these major contracts and looking at 5 or 6 key statistics, burn rate being one of them. And so we're monitoring that a lot closer now, so I appreciate that comment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I just want to drill down a little bit more, following up on Toby's comment about them getting paid for not doing anything. So the way this contract works, they hire a full-time dedicated person for our project. And so if that individual happens to have idle time on his or her hands, we're still covering 100% of that person's payroll? Is that how this contract works? Because, you know, in my world, like Toby's world, you know, you charge based on the actual hours worked, right? So I just want to understand how this contract functions at that level.
So the CE&I consultant recommends an organization to provide construction management services to a particular contract. Typically a resident engineer, an office engineer, a couple lead engineers, some inspectors. If, as we execute the work and oversee the work, if we believe that there's efficiencies that can be made with respect to that organization, then we consult with the CE&I and we make them. For example, I mean, I will tell you right now that I don't have, for example, for each of the station groups, let's say a change management lead that is basically orchestrating the change management process for each of the 3 contracts. We don't have one per each right now. So, and we may not need one. And as such that those kinds of discussions take place. If we don't believe that we need full-up staff when we get to a certain point in time, then we would direct them to stand down people. And would like to think that that should be a part of their staffing plan anyway as we conclude a project and close a project out. I mean, for example, I mentioned that we're in the final throes of, or final acceptance for the MSF. I mean, we probably went from 6, 8 people maybe 6 months ago to 1 person. And I'm transferring him to do other change management responsibilities. But we should not have dedicated assets sitting there. It's not the way we would oversee this. I came from a senior RE job in New York City. I was overseeing core systems work. I had a staff of 20. When we went through revenue service, we probably cut down to about 6 people. And I had to brief the agency with respect to how I was overseeing the closeout. So we're expecting the same thing with respect to our consultant in terms of managing their personnel and overseeing the contracts.
So Frank, I just want to clarify though. So let's say we cut back from 6 to 2, because that's what we think is all that's required at that point in at that stage of construction. But we are still paying for 100% of the payroll for those 2 individuals, plus whatever markup that the contractor provides.
Okay, didn't mean to cut you off. Unless we don't believe they're a full-time, and then I mean, there are people that we are paying for this consultant on that we are not paying full-time, because we're not utilizing their services full-time.
It's not a fixed price contract.
It's not a.
Okay, so so it is an hourly based contract. They have to justify the hours they bill us for.
That's correct, and we review that. We review that with every pay app.
Got it. So Toby, is there still I'm just trying to get to the point that you made, because there was a disconnect for me. I don't understand why we'd be paying for people that aren't actually performing work. Does that clarify it, or? I'm sorry?
I don't understand it, to be honest with you, but I have a sense that it's being overseen responsibly and just based on what he's saying, and I just have to take it, for truth. I mean, it does seem like it's. It does seem like it's a situation that's you have to stay on top of, because it can get away from you pretty quickly. But it's just a different business model that I'm not used to.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
So this is not a fixed price contract? Or it is?
It's a fixed price contract, but it's a not to exceed amount where
Yeah.
we pay based on invoices for services performed.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
when you say fixed price, what that conjures up to me, and we have a fixed price contract with STG, for example. So you give them a scope of work, and they bid a fixed price based on that scope of work, and then they deliver according to that. That's not what this is. This is more time and materials where we pay for people, and if we don't need the people anymore, we don't pay.
Right, but then it's capped at a certain amount, so it
It's capped.
cannot exceed the
Correct.
amount. So it is, to me, a fixed price contract in that regard. That's what I meant by fixed price contract.
Well, in that regard, yeah, but it's not a lump sum fixed price contract, let's put it that way.
Yeah, so on page 6 of the presentation, it shows that there's an asterisk to the total contract value of 90.2 million, and the asterisk represents not to exceed amount of there, so.
Not to exceed.
Okay.
Frank shouldn't be coming back and asking the board for any more money after this.
Frank won't be
right?
coming back asking you for
Frank-
more money for this.
Yes. Thank
And I
you.
won't send somebody else.
Yeah, it won't be Frank.
That's a good hedge.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, so on the change order on the west section, we're looking to seek approval for the extra $20 million for the finishing of this contract itself.
Move for approval.
Okay, there's a motion. Second?
Second.
All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion is carried.
Mahalo.
Thank you.
Chair,
Yes,
excuse me, I need to leave.
okay. I think, yeah, we're not voting, so thank you. Thank you for your time. May monthly progress report, Andy? Yeah, voting is done. We just need quorum to hold the meeting. Thanks, Jade. Okay, May monthly progress report. Any
Is Frank still here? I have a question.
question?
Frank.
Frank? No, Frank might have left. Andy, you stuck to answer it now then.
If you can find out, Andy, I noticed on the SDG contract,
Oh,
they haven't been, or we haven't paid them for the last 4 months. Is there, hopefully there's not an issue with that contract. Looks like they're still working out there. The SDG contract, the ESG, I noticed the last 4 months, we didn't release any payments to them. Can you check on that?
Yes, I can check on that. I'm not aware of any issues. Things are working fine with them, and in fact, we're executing a partnering session with them next month. But certainly, I'll check on that and get back to you.
Maybe they haven't billed them.
Wow.
Any other
Looking on-
questions?
That's on page 42. Incurred in April, 0. And it was like that 3 months before that.
Yes,
Just
I
check
don't
on
have an
that.
answer at the top of my head. I'll get back to the board with a response.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Item number 12, April Project Management Oversight Consultant Report. Andy?
Okay, the PMOC report is in your packet. Are there any questions? In regard to the risk refresh, which was discussed at the last PMOC report, we do expect a final report from the FDA. I'm expecting it by the end of the month.
Okay. Your Executive Director's report, Andy.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of items to report to you that have not been discussed already. A couple of weeks ago, I participated in the Verge conference, which was held here in Waikiki. And I participated on 2 panel discussions as well as a working lunch that they had. The conference focuses in on sustainability here on the island, very focused on the mandate to be at 100% renewables by 2045 in terms of our electric energy generation, as well as the use of electric vehicles and non-polluting vehicles in that same time frame. One of the things I pointed out at the conference, which seemed to get a lot of attention, is there's roughly 8,000 electric vehicles on the road today here in Honolulu, and the conference was very focused on how to increase that amount, what barriers there are to, increasing the use of electric vehicles. What we pointed out, and there was also a lot of discussion about capacity, transportation capacity here on the island. So what I was able to point out is that when we go into full service in 2025, based on our ridership projections, we will be putting 120,000 people a day in electric vehicles. So I think that made a big impression because that's a much bigger number than anything that's being talked about today in terms of increasing the use of electric vehicles, as well as the increase in capacity. Because that's the ridership projection, but the installed capacity at 2025, 2030 will be in the 200,000 passenger range. And we have the ability to even double that capacity with the inclusion of more fleet into the system. So I think that made a big impression on the conference attendees that this project is a major contributor to a lot of their goals in terms of sustainability, energy savings, and the like. This week, I also participated, as well as some of our members of our staff, in a meeting at the University of Hawaii with President David Lassner. And it was a very good meeting because we were able to discuss many of the issues that we have. There are things that we have in common. Some of them include the need, some of the construction access that we need. We'll be installing substation out at Leeward on UH property, so we need agreements in regard to that. We, on behalf of HECO and those specialized vehicles that we discussed a few months ago, storage areas for those vehicles will also be on UH property, so we were able to have those discussions. We also discussed the fact that we have a major training program in connection with Leeward Community College that we're very proud of, where we kicked off earlier this year a 2-year associate's degree program for electrical mechanical type work training that will be very relevant to the operations and maintenance of the rail project. I believe the initial class had about 16 students, and working together with Leeward College, we expect to ramp up the participation of students taking that type of program. There is a need on the island, and especially for our project, for these type of skill sets. So it's very good collaboration with the UH system. And we're also going to be looking at extending that program over to Honolulu Community College. But the other major focus of the discussion that was really initiated by President Lasner was, starting to think about extending this system already to UH Manoa. That is very important to the university system, and they're really looking forward to us potentially getting into a planning process in the near future to start planning the future extension to UH Manoa. I think one of the nice benefits of this project crossing the island is that we touch a lot of the institutes of learning, whether it's in the UH system or other universities and colleges. We touch a lot of them. So to have the ability for students to be able to move around, for faculty to be able to move around, is very useful and important to these colleges and universities, and UH Manoa just as a natural extension. So he wanted to emphasize that, and of course we indicated that we're on board. We just need the mandate and the funding to be able to move forward with the planning for that extension. So with that, thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Andy? If not, let's see, that's it. Thank you guys for attending today. I know Cindy will, on the PIC committee for the search for the 9th board member, Cindy will coordinate in getting together and.
Mr. Chair, speaking of that, I'd like to volunteer to sit on that.
Too late, he wasn't here. No, I think we have one more spot, sorry. I think we have one more spot. Wait.
He's just kidding around with you.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, okay. I believe that's the 7th, right?
If not, you can replace me if not.
No, I think we have.
Nice try.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Replacing one
6.
west for the next west.
They just said west. That's 7, I think that's 7 members right there. If you only could-
Yeah, 6.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
No, adding West on top?
Yeah. West made 6, you had 5.
Terry, Kathy, Hoyt, Toby, Wes, Kamani, and
West is already on there.
Yeah?
Okay, then that's 7.
Yeah, there's 7.
Yeah, I didn't catch.
Okay. So, yes, you can.
Did you count yourself? Did you count yourself?
No, now, I'm not gonna fill the spot, he took him, so that's okay. I'll
Oh,
give
Chair,
it
you
to
can
Wes.
take my spot.
No,
One
that's
west
okay.
is enough, that's
No,
why I'm there.
It's okay. All right, thank you. Call for adjournment? Is there a second? All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Okay. Meeting is adjourned.